Good to go, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll call the Joint Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee meeting to order on November 5th at 8:30 a.m. Announcements are that we'll keep the meeting civil, and we will take the opportunity to cut anybody off that is not being civil. So the other things are we want to respect all the speakers and the legislators. So I don't think I have any more announcements. Does anybody have any announcements? No announcements. Let's start with roll call then, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman,
Yes,
just real quick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a couple people who are switching over and joining us. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out and congratulations to Representative O'Hearn and Representative Furphy, who's going to be a senator. So just wanted to put that out there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Good. Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, and I wanted to echo those congratulations to our members, particularly those that will be joining us for the first time. And Dan, welcome over to the Senate side. It's a lot calmer, more nap time. It's great. Great to be there.
Thank you, Senator.
Anybody else with an announcement?
Thank you. I'm looking forward to joining you guys and gals. Looking forward to it.
Good. Thank you, Representative O'Hearn. Okay, let's proceed with roll call.
Senator Biteman.
Here.
Senator Coe.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Senator Wasberger.
Here.
Representative Burkhart.
Here.
Representative Crank. Representative Crank.
Here.
Representative Duncan.
Here.
Representative Ayer.
Here.
Representative Furphy.
Here.
Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative O'Hearn.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Present.
Co-Chairman Anderson
Here,
and Co-Chairman Greer.
excused. Okay, we got the roll call done. Mary Beth?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We got a quorum, I guess we could say, huh?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, good. First order of business is the governor's office. We have an update from Randall Luthi, I believe.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, while we're admitting him, I just wanted to take a moment to, we have a new staff member who's joining our committee, Clarissa Nord, who should be popping up on your screen. She received her bachelor's degree and master's degree from the University of Wyoming. She's interned for the U.S. Attorney's Office. She's also interned for LSO, the 2020 budget session, and she's part of the research division, and we're delighted to have her join us.
Good. Welcome, Clarissa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm really looking forward to staffing this committee, so please let me know if y'all ever have any questions, concerns. Yeah, really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Clarissa's team blockchain also. So, she's a great one.
Well, she's blockchain. She's sure a great one, that's for sure. Oh, yes, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any handouts for this presentation?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, there are not.
Thank you.
I don't think there is. I think this is just a summary by Randall Luthi. So Randall, you're ready. I see we even have a picture of you today.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now.
I had you both on YouTube and otherwise, and I couldn't figure out how to mute YouTube. So I just disconnected all of you. So I'll just deal with it this way. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. First of all, I bring you greetings from Governor Gordon. He is fine and anxiously awaiting the time when he clears the remaining protocols and returns to his office in his usual schedule. I was actually home for a couple of days, and one of the days that he called me, we were getting ready to preg check, and I think he would have actually been rather working with me on that than being quarantined in the mansion, but I won't say that for sure, but I think so. This week elections continue to dominate the news cycle, both nationally and here in Wyoming. And as you've watched the election returns, much of the commentary has also centered around energy, or the lack thereof, and its effect upon particularly our economy and budget. The governor and I look forward to continuing to work with the legislature and particularly this committee as we set the course for our energy and mining industries to return to full and productive work. And that is the work of supplying energy and minerals to Wyoming citizens and consumers across the nation. You recall the 1-2 punch of the Saudi-Russian oil war, and the COVID-19 is still a drag on our Wyoming industries. We will not fully recover until people are comfortable to venture out of their homes, be willing to travel freely, and banks are comfortable to supply capital to our core industries. We greatly appreciate your leadership in providing this, what I call a staging area for our industries to get ready and be able to lead the economic recovery when conditions allow. We will continue our support of our industries in this time, and we will work with you to prepare for whatever will be the new normal in 2021. Here's a brief update of our activities. First, coordination with the Wyoming Energy Authority. The WAA is a creation of your efforts over the last 2 sessions and even before, and I know they'll be reporting to you later. I think their progress has been remarkable, and we are working closely with them on an overall energy strategy for the state. While an energy strategy isn't a particularly new thing, there really has never been a better time to strategically plan for where we will be in 1 year, where we want to be in 5 years and 10 years, and into the next generation. The governor's natural resource strategy has 4 main priorities. Number 1, support and enhance existing and new energy resources and industries. Number 2, assist industries to survive until they can thrive. Number 3, energy development and the environment can both thrive in Wyoming. And 4, energy and mining will continue to provide significant revenue to the state of Wyoming. Right now, I think the WEA is fitting well into the gatekeeper role as they work with the School of Energy Resources, the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, and the Wyoming Business Council. They work with them to provide services and support for existing and new energy proposals. And it's certainly the governor's goal, and I believe it's your goal as well, to make the WEA more than just a gatekeeper. We'd support your efforts at looking and expanding the WEA coverage to the mineral and critical elements sector, and also taking a close look at the bonding capability of the WEA. The Wyoming Business Council and the latest round of COVID programs. You'll also hear from the Wyoming Business Council and the status of the programs that you helped develop over the special session. We've also worked with them to provide in a timely manner to coordinate the necessary funding transfers and for AG review. As you will hear, these programs have been particularly helpful to Wyoming small businesses. The programs that just opened this week are targeted toward small businesses and also COVID-related expenses our businesses have occurred after that first round. We're also looking at the possibility of using some of the funds to assist in the completion of drilled but uncompleted wells. North Dakota took such an approach. We've got some issues we're trying to work through with the AG's review and making sure that it fits the lines and the directions given by the Congress and Department of Treasury, but we are looking at that possibility. Here's an update on the Converse County EIS. You may not have heard about it for a while, but let me tell you, as you know, the project is vital to Wyoming, and the governor has stated more than once that he is committed to see that this project actually allows year-round development. The BLM decision process is wrapping up, and we expect a record of decision to be issued soon. Here's an update on the Wyoming, Montana versus Washington litigation. As you know, we submitted the request to the Supreme Court to grant, to hear this case, and the Supreme Court requested the U.S. Solicitor General to provide views on the case. Just about 2 weeks ago, the Attorney General's office participated in a conference call with the Solicitor General and other federal agencies. We expect the Solicitor General will provide their views to the Supreme Court before the end of the year. Should the Supreme Court grant our request that they hear the case, next year will certainly be a busy time for the AG's office, as well as we keep up with what's going to be happening. Coordination with federal agencies. Let me start with the Department of Energy. Frankly, never has the coordination been better. Since we last talked, they released a carbon capture and utilization study for Wyoming that took the time to look at 9 particular units and judge their technical feasibility and economic viability to put a carbon capture unit on these elements. I recommend you take the study for what it is. It's data. It gives you a starting point. It gives electric utilities a starting point. It's data that we should look at, evaluate, and use. We continue to watch the DOE for funding opportunities. They are continually releasing funding opportunities, and programs such as SCR and other industries within Wyoming, often they're able to take advantage of that. And we're watching that and can assist wherever we can. We also appreciate their efforts to keep moving us forward to actually developing a carbon capture unit in the state of Wyoming. And we also really appreciate this committee's efforts to do so as well. You know, frankly, as we look at this overall energy strategy, and when you look at the goals of many of our surrounding states, and particularly those consuming states, I think it's really clear to us that Wyoming can and should continue to be a great exporter of energy. However, to do that and to be able to really use all of Wyoming's resources, I think we're going to need to look closely at adopting and further adopting, I should say, more carbon capture facilities, the use of wind, solar, and nuclear. And if we do that, I believe that we can make Wyoming a leader in using this all-the-above energy approach and actually produce lower CO2 energy. So I talk about some coordination with other agencies, particularly the Department of Interior and EPA. And let me once again say, it just never has been better. It's been my joy and the governor's delight, I will say, in speaking for him, to be able to work with these agencies. As we look forward, and certainly the short term, elections have consequences. I know this election has not been decided, but should it continue to go in the way it is this morning, we will have consequences. And should there be an administration change, we look forward to continuing to work with you to protect the great progress that we have made in the last 4 years. The federal leasing ban study. You've heard API did a study on what the effect would be if the federal government stopped leasing of oil and gas. The legislature earlier this year as a whole also provided funds for such a study. That study is being wrapped up, and we assume its results will be ready about the middle of this month so we can be able to share that with you, as well as, you know, anyone else who's interested in what the effect of, should there be a federal leasing ban, not only upon Wyoming, but I believe it's 6 other Western states. So I think that should be a very interesting study. Next week, the governor has a conference call with Governor-elect Spencer Cox out of Utah. We'll certainly be talking about how we in Utah can work together, particularly for the export of natural gas, and as well as possibilities on terminals on the West Coast that could be used for other Wyoming products as well. And finally, I was just mentioning the coal marketing program, HB4, which your committee introduced as a joint committee bill last year and was passed. We used part of that money, as you know, for a contract with the Environmental Policy Network. And frankly, members of the committee, you know, much of Wyoming still supplies about 47% of thermal coal. Most of that coal is used outside the state of Wyoming. Frankly, we have found the Environmental Policy Network to be absolutely vital to help represent to those other states, public service committee or public service commissions or public utility commissions about the importance of really using economics as well as the ability of using low sulfur coal before you make the decision just to stop using coal. I know it's made headlines both here and somewhat nationally that this is the use of dark money. And I just have to, frankly, I somewhat roll my eyes. The governor announced this contract in a news conference. The legislature, and I believe this committee even as well, has discussed the possibility. I just don't know how you could shed any more light on the use of that money. And we appreciate the ability to do that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I've managed to keep talking long enough that none of you could interrupt, but should you have some questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
I'll bet we have questions, Randall. Any questions for Mr. Luthi? Any questions? I have one. You mentioned that those wells drilled but not completed. We looked into that some time ago. We're pretty concerned about it, but it did not look like Wyoming had a lot of those wells. Are you finding something different on that we maybe have more than we thought?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, we're not finding a huge number, but that also means it shouldn't take a huge amount of money. But that's still one of the reasons we're looking at. As you know, there was a $1.25 billion is quite a bit of money for Wyoming to spend. And certainly we can and will do it. But we just thought that was well worth looking at, particularly since North Dakota had started just a program about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think we saw North Dakota had more wells than we did that were drilled but not completed. But that was kind of a trend there for quite a while, that the majors were just putting, either they weren't doing the final completions or they did the final completions and just never pumped them. But we found that North Dakota was a little more, had a few more of those than we did. Okay, any other questions? Any other questions of the governor's office? No other questions? Are there any public comments? Mary Beth, is there anybody waiting in the public?
Mr. Chairman, there is not.
Oh, okay. Okay, Randall, so I guess you did talk long enough to keep us at bay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I can't tell you enough how much I enjoy working with each of you. And I look forward to it as we go forward. And as always, I will attempt to talk so much that you have no time to ask me questions.
Okay, thanks, Randall.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission with an update. And Mark Watson, you have a packet in your handout, the pretty extensive packet that he's going to go over. So we're going to go right on with Mark Watson and the great job that he does with the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We appreciate everything you do, Mark. and everything you're getting done during these troubling times. So thank you for everything you do and the great job that the Oil and Gas Commission is doing for the state of Wyoming right now. So, Mark Watson. Turn on your speaker, Mr. Watson.
How's that? That better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
So I didn't know if Mary Beth was going to put up my talk or if I need to share my screen.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Watson, you can certainly share your screen. You have that ability.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll leave it up to the committee if you want to see my PowerPoint on the screen, if you want me to just discuss it. I think everybody has a copy.
I think everybody has a copy. I'm not sure they need to.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the public may not have a copy available, so I think it would be better if Mr. Watson actually showed his presentation as he spoke, just for the public that are watching at home. And I'm sure it's a robust group that is very enthused about hearing from Mr. Watson.
I bet it is. I bet it is.
Okay. How's that? Everybody can see my PowerPoint?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for those kind comments and members of the committee. I'm Mark Watson, the Director of the Oil and Gas Commission. I was asked to discuss 2 items, so let me do it this way. Okay, here we go. So I'll discuss the 2020 Orphan Well Plug and Reclamation Program. And then after that, I'll discuss our APD rule that we put into effect, excuse me, last December. So starting with the Orphan Well Program, first I want to say is a lot of the numbers I present today are outdated because I did this report 3 weeks ago, and with great weather, we've been ongoing projects and plugging these wells. But this percentage, you can see it's roughly 40, 30, 30. So we break it down into projects completed, projects in progress, and upcoming projects. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see our total contracted amount. So that adds up to 6.2 million for this year for either contracted and paid out for some projects that are completed. And we also have several upcoming projects. So, and I thought I'll put it into numbers, approximate. So to date, approximately 834 wells have been plugged. We have 219 wells that are in ongoing projects that, as long as the weather is favorable, they'll probably be done by the end of the year. And then finally, there are 595 wells under contract in 3 separate projects that will continue probably into 21. So for number of wells plugged, process of being plugged or under contract is 1,648.
Hey, Mark, that dollar amount is going down. I see in fiscal year 21, it's down to 2.8 million. Does that mean we're plugging fewer or that we're catching up with the plugged wells?
Well, we're plugging more. And if you remember, when I presented in May, you'd asked what we were going to do, and I said 400 or 500, and you said, well, you need to up your game. So that's exactly what we did. So yeah, I mean, normally we're in the 400 or 500 range, and now we've probably tripled that amount. So our normal budget for plugging, we just put 7 million for the biennium so that's 7 million 2 years. We'd spend 3.5 million per year. And this number isn't quite double the 6.2 million, and that's just for this year, 2020, and there'll be a few going into 21. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So we talked about that. So with the projects, like I said, I have them broken down into complete, ongoing, and upcoming, and at the end, I'll talk about some federal projects. The Antelope Ventrum, this was a project north of Casper, and these were actually vertical wells, and that one started late or early of 20, just 6 wells, and that project is complete. The Piney Creek project, now we're getting into coal bed wells. The contractor's WYDAC. They're a company out of Buffalo. I'll note that all the contractors are contractors out of Wyoming. 54 wells. That one was completed. Cost of $234,000. The Huber pits, these are pits that were on some land that Huber, which is a company that no longer involved in oil and gas, they wanted these pits cleaned up because they had some surface use agreements that were quite costly. So what we did was we got together with Huber and said, we have $200,000 in bonding. We'll give you that. Any extra you'll have to pay. And so that one started last winter and worked over through into this year, and they closed 4 pits. And then Spot Horse, we're back. This is back to coal bed wells. JTE Services is a company out of Gillette. This one started in September, but really was finished into this year in May. Cost us $621,000. North Gillette, Continental Industries is a company out of Casper. This included 210 wells. And you'll note in a lot of these, the final project cost is less than the contracted cost. And what we do when a company wins a bid, we add maybe 10, 15% contingency. And that's for things like if they have to work on roads, they might have to cut the grass so they don't start grass fires, things like that. So we always add a little bit in. So a lot of times you'll see the final project cost will be less than the contracted cost. And in this case, they plugged the CBM wells, and of those 210, 16 were transferred over to landowners. And you see that a lot with our wells. When we're out on location, we get with the landowners, and if there's wells that they want that can be converted over, we just give those to them. They just get a permit through the state engineer's office. East Urban Project, these are all around just north of Gillette. Mega Energy, another company out of Gillette, just 52 wells, and the final project cost of $200,000. 6 of the wells going to landowners. Interstate, just south of that, still around Gillette, 114 wells. This project is ongoing, and I believe it may be, going through my notes here, it may be completed. Yep. So this was completed as of November 6th, and of those 114 wells, approximately 20 were turned over to landowners. Total cost of the project was $338,000. Echeta, this is west and north of Gillette. Again, JTE Services out of Gillette, 275 wells at 100. And the contract cost is $1.25 million. And I believe we have, to date, now we're up to 189 wells that have been plugged. So this project should be finished by the end of the year. Airport project, 80 wells in the Gillette area. They've probably got about half of them done. They expect to be done November 5th, maybe, but at least by the end of the year.
Mark, are these, we're talking about all CBM wells?
Yes, so far. Near the end, I'll get into some wells that a project that we have in the western part of the state.
Yeah, okay.
So the Recluse area, plugging along, is a company out of Gillette, total of 157 wells. They've probably plugged half of them. And so this is one of the ongoing projects so far. 294.9 thousand has been spent. So here's, Chairman Anderson, these are conventional wells, and you can see there's several west and southwest of Pinedale. There's one almost on the Utah border. So these vertical wells, in some of these are in the 10 to 13,000 foot range as far as vertical depth. So these wells are obviously a little more expensive to plug. And there's, in a lot of cases, there could be ongoing surface rehab issues that will continue on to next year. We've plugged 2 now. Brigade Energy is a company, they have offices in Thermont, Powell, and I believe Casper. So those wells, that project, they'll continue on throughout the winter. IGS Tinhorns, the red stars around Wamsutter, these were vertical wells that we plugged over the last couple of years.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
These conventional wells, you don't plug those complete depth, do you? Or is there a TB bottom on them that you go to, or do you go completely to the bottom?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Now, on conventional wells, we plug them every 2,500 feet. We plug off the perfs. We try and squeeze those through a retainer. And then if they're up at the base of the surface casing, we'll shoot and squeeze that and circulate cement around there to cover up all the shallow groundwaters. So we don't fill these up top to bottom, but we do stage them every 2,500 feet.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. So the Tinhorns, these are just underground tanks on location. They're underground just because they're gravity fed. So those ones we have to tear out, and a lot of times if they leak, there's soil remediation necessary. So those will continue on throughout this winter working on those. And like I said, these are wells that we plugged over the last couple of years, and now we're doing as part of the surface remediation, removing those Tinhorns and cleaning up the soil and cleaning up any roads.
Are these buried tanks?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, you can see the top of the tank, but yes, they are buried.
Huh.
It's not something we see a lot, but these are really old wells. And that's kind of just how they did it. You know, now we just have open pits. So now we're into these are upcoming projects that have all, we have contracts on. So when I wrote the report, I don't think we'd had the contract yet. So, and this one, we just got the bid last week. So the winning bidder was WOGCC, and they're a company out of Buffalo at a cost of $530,000. And these are we're back to coal bed wells, approximately 141 wells. So they'll probably, depending on weather, they may do it over the winter, but I would imagine it'd be complete next year. The West Prairie Dog right next door. Winning bid here is JTE Services out of Gillette, 282 wells, and the winning bid was 1.1 million. The Huber wells, these are wells that Huber had, and once again, they had the pretty expensive surface use agreements that they're ongoing paying. And so we give them the bond money that we have, and then any additional costs Huber has to pay, and then they subcontract out to one of the contractors, usually one of the ones that we work for. So these are 172 wells that they'll get started, and probably those will be done in 2021. CBM Pits. So we just got our first package together of 10 pits. That was winning bid of WOGCC again. And so those will probably get started, you know, depending on whether they can work on them over the winter, but they'll be completed in 2021. And finally, the federal orphan well projects. So this is an interesting situation that happened a couple of years ago where the BLM, their funding is the usual use it or lose it. And so what they wanted to do was come up with a funding mechanism. So they call it a grant. They give us a grant every year of money they have that's set aside for orphan plugging. And then we just save that in an account for them, and it can build up over time. And then as the BLM identifies wells they need plugging, they'll get with us, and then we'll actually do the bidding and contract work for them, just because, you know, we have more experience doing it. And so we'll do that. And after the winning bid, then we'll turn that contract over to the BLM. They'll work with the BLM field people to get those wells plugged. We'll actually pay the contractor. Once the contractor's paid, then we get back with the BLM to get that grant money converted over to our account. But this has been a good way of, a lot of times we'll be plugging coal bed wells in an area, and there'll be federal wells included. And so this way, you know, the landowner's happy because we can get all the wells plugged in an area. And that's, you know, in the case number 3 with those medallion wells. And that's it for the first part of my talk.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ruffus.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mark, great work on ramping up the pace. When we said, try and kick it up a little bit, 3x, that's a hell of a kick up. So I think we really appreciate that work. Question I have is about the pace of the federal work, which you just showed on the previous slide, relative to the state work. It's my recollection over the years that they've been plugging at a much slower pace, where you almost can barely see a light at the end of the tunnel based on the pace that they're providing resources relative to the pace that we've been working. Is that still the case? The numbers I saw for the previous slide looked like it was relatively low compared to what you've been doing on non-federal land. How does that look in the long term, and how is that pacing going for the feds?
Well, with the BLM, you have to understand that, the numbers don't reflect what's really going on, because their definition for an orphan well, if a company goes bankrupt, they can actually go after previous operators, which we can't do, because with the BLM, they own the lease, so that they can put that in their contracts. So a lot of times there are actually companies out there plugging federal wells that maybe they're the original company that drilled them, and it's been sold 2 or 3 times. So when you see the orphan wells that they're actually plugging, it looks like, well, they're not keeping up to us. But, those are the wells that they've gone back in time, and there are no more operators that are, still functioning. And so you have to kind of be a little bit careful of looking at the numbers that the BLM has plugging compared to the Oil and Gas Commission.
Other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up.
Yeah.
So honestly, do you think it's pacing reasonably well then, based on that, or do you think I can't recall the number, but we had a tremendous number of, we won't call them orphaned based on what you just said, but of currently abandoned wells on coal bed methane land, as I understand it, that have remained on the books. Are those being addressed? Is that number being reduced, or is that basically where we saw it a few years ago?
Well, I think they're doing better than a few years ago. I mean, it's hard to comment exactly the numbers, because I have enough trouble keeping up with what my agency does. But because I know that companies are out there plugging federal wells, like Huber, for instance, all the wells that they have, the coal bed wells, they're getting plugged because of the surface use agreements they have, and because they're the original company and they had that obligation to the BLM. So I think they're doing a much better job than they were a couple of years ago.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What about the area of complaints related to the APDs? How's that going?
Well, that's going good. That's actually my next topic. So maybe I'll, hold on to that question, and I'll go through this next part, and, jump in anytime if you have questions.
Before you go to that, Mark, can you tell me where Bothwell is, the number 5 and number 6 Universal Bothwell? There was a famous guy in Wyoming history that took place in hanging a few people. His name was Bothwell. Is that in the Carbon County area?
Okay, so which one are you talking about?
Number 5 and number 6 there on Orphan Wells, the Universal Bothwell.
Okay, now I gotta go back and number 6. Oh, you're talking about the federal programs?
Yeah, I think it is Federal Orphan Well Project.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's in the western part of the state, but I really can't tell you where those wells are located.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll move on to the second part of my discussion on the APD rule. So that APD rule, which is Chapter 3, Section 8, L and M in our rules, it became effective December 2019. So I thought I'd maybe go back just to kind of do a quick reminder of kind of how we got to the rule change. And so I just did a simple example of a drilling and spacing unit. 1280s is 2 sections put together. That's the normal spacing unit for horizontal wells. And so in Wyoming law, anybody has the right to drill no matter what percentage you have. So in this case, you have 4 operators, one operator 78%, a small operator with just 3%. But any one of these operators actually has that right to develop that unit. So over time, operators developed a strategy, what we call the race for operatorship, where they would come in and space that drilling and spacing unit, and then they put in the requisite number of wells. A lot of times it would be up to 8 wells per formation. And so once they had all the APDs in that drilling and spacing unit, they had it locked out. No one else, none of the other 3 working interest owners could develop that. They didn't have to actually drill once they had an APD, so there was they weren't forced to actually develop those. And of course, this led to the problem of a strategy to stifle competition and development of that mineral lease. It affected the ability of the original mineral owners to actually lease the minerals. And of course, it overwhelmed the Oil and Gas Commission with APDs and applications. And on this slide, you can see, this is over a 3-year period where in 2018, the numbers were starting to ramp up for these are drilling permits received. 2019, it really got high volume. 4 of the months, you can see we're over 3,000 drilling permits per month. In 2020, things start to slow down. And so I'll just do, the next slide is just 2 years. So in 2019, you can see the numbers were high. And in July, that was the highest. And that's the month that we introduced our rule. So that's where everybody could actually see the language and how it was going to work. And then after we had our 45-day comment period and such. And then so operators kind of saw the writing on the wall and less permits were submitted. And then December 2019, that's when the rule was finalized. And then after that, operators realized, well, one, they only needed 1 APD and a DSU to be the operator instead of 8, 16, however many. So we didn't need as many drilling permits, and operators who really didn't have the intent to drill, there was no use for them filing permits because with the new rule, they could be challenged. So this shows, one aspect for the rule that we tried to accomplish was to reduce our volume of permits. So obviously this worked here. And I know we had COVID, but if you look at January, February, and March, those numbers were down quite a bit. And then of course, April is when price drops and COVID. But I've talked to a lot of companies and, they're looking ahead, later this year, maybe next year when prices start to firm up and they want permits, the ones that are actually ready to drill. So there's some good news on the horizon there. So as I mentioned, the new rule, there's an L, part L and part M. And part L basically just determines who the operator is. So if you had a producing well on there, no one else could file permits. If you didn't, then it was the oldest permit. That operator became the operator of that DSU. But the second part of the rule is this is the part where operators can challenge other operators' permits every 2 years. So if they haven't drilled wells, then another company who has a working interest ownership within that DSU, they can come in and challenge that. And it basically in that, go ahead.
On this chart that shows all the APDs that were received by yourself, it really excites me that we could have 3,500 or so. Let's see, 7,000. I don't know how many there is there, 10,000. How many of those did we actually process, and how many could be drilled in the future that are just sitting and waiting now?
Well, of those permits received, I would say 10% or less actually got drilled. But because an operator only needs 1 permit in a DSU instead of 8, when they renew them, they'll only just renew 1, and then they're saving, say they needed 7 or 8, 7 times 5. So they're saving $3,500 in a DSU. And in the future, once they get the well drilled, then they're the operator of that spacing unit. And if they want to drill more, they can file APDs because they're actually going to drill. So this rule has also saved millions of dollars for industry.
So Mark, do you think we have already drilled these wells that we have permitted, or are we still working on permitting some of these and they could be drilled in the future?
Well, they could always be drilled in the future. I'm just saying right now, most of these operators, private equity, they just wanted to drill one well in a DSU to de-risk it. And, once they had a few wells drilled, it's easier to sell a package when you have wells, and companies that want to buy it can see what the actual production is. So, when you look at the thousands of permits that were received, it shows the potential if you actually fully develop these drilling and spacing units. Because in most cases, a horizontal well might drain 200, 250 acres within that DSU. So there's a lot of room for additional drilling. We just need to get the price up to at least above $40. Not $40 would be for Wyoming. We're probably $8 less now with the penalty. So ideally, once we get to $50 West Texas, then you'll see operators start to develop these DSUs.
Okay.
So back to the rule, that the Section 8M, what this does, it just gives operators a checklist of everything they have to submit, and that's both the challenger and the operator who had the original DSU. So they both have to file an application basically showing that they want to drill, they're ready to drill, and they've drilled wells in the past, they have federal permits, etc. So just, gives a simple checklist for operators to file that permit to show, this is what the commission wants to see. And so since the rule, I think there's about 50 applications have been filed in this challenging process under 8M. And of those 54, only one has actually come to hearing. So all the others, they've withdrawn their protests, they've worked a deal out, or we've had some uncontested hearings where one operator didn't challenge or didn't object, and so they just went to examiner hearing and were approved. But in this case, this was heard in just last month in October, so it's good that I at least have one hearing to discuss. So both operators that came in with their information, operator A had been in the Powder River Basin, for quite a number of years. So they developed the area. They have 70 wells drilled. They were actually drilling during COVID. They had the one rig drilling in the Powder River Basin. So that was an interesting statistic. They had really good wells. They had pipeline and water infrastructure already in place. They had the requisite BLM permits necessary for any DSU that had federal minerals in it. And they also own the midstream gas gathering system as well as water infrastructure. So here was an operator that says, we've drilled wells, we're going to continue to drill wells, and there's some permits that operator B has, and we want to drill those wells. So operator B comes in, and they're new to the basin. They'd only drilled one well, and the production wasn't really that good. So they really didn't have much of a leg to stand on. And it was a 4-hour hearing. And at the end, the commission voted 5-0 to give operator A access to those permits that operator B was trying to renew. They'd had it for 2 years and hadn't drilled. And the commission, when they made their comments, they said that operator A had checked up all the boxes that was required under 8M. And they were very cognizant of the reasons why we developed the rule in the first place. Get Wyoming minerals developed, stop the APD fight and protest, and allow operator who shows a willingness to drill the opportunity to get those APDs and drill the wells. And before this rule, they couldn't have done that. They were just locked out. And so, when I look at the reasons why we made the rule and what we wanted for an outcome, whenever you have a problem, you say, well, we want solutions, and what do those solutions look like? Well, did we decrease the volume of APDs? I think our charts that I showed, prove that. It also decreased the volume of hearings. We've gone from 2,000 to 3,000 hearings a month back down to a reasonable 200 or 300. We had 54 original applications challenging APDs, and yet only one came before the commission. So that shows that operators are actually negotiating in the boardroom, which is where they should do it. And one operator doesn't have any more advantage over the other operator. So, now they have a reason to negotiate. And the operators, like in the case of the hearing, gives them an opportunity to develop that minerals, and we remove the roadblocks because of that 8M rule. And so that's all I had as far as a review on that, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions or remark on the APDs? Representative Henderson, did that answer some of your questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I guess the other thing I was thinking about, as you compare where we are now with what we were doing in the past, there has to be some fiscal positives related to this in terms of the use of resources and people and such. So I'm glad to hear the results. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Other questions for Mr. Watson? Any other questions? Other questions on anything on for Mr. Watson? None? All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Watson. Thank you for the great job you did on our direction about kicking up the activity on plugged wells and reservoirs for that matter. We wanted to see activity over there. I've heard from contractors that never thought they'd plug a well, that's keeping their business going now. So you've done a great job with that charge. You and the BLM, I guess, maybe.
Well, I appreciate those comments, and I mean, you have to remember, it's really my staff that's doing all the work. There's several people out in the field today, getting the job done and witnessing these projects. So, you'd have to have good people with you.
Yeah, good. Mary Beth, are there any public comments?
Mr. Chairman, there is no one signed up for public comments on this topic.
All right, good enough. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, now I think we're going to move on to DEQ update. I believe we have Mr. Todd Parfit on this one. Oh, we do. Yes. The famous Todd Parfit. Todd, do you want to take it away with your update on what the DEQ's been doing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Whether it's okay or not, I don't know.
We'll find out, right? All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with me today, I'm not sure how that's all going to work, but we have Luke Esch and Kevin Frederick to talk about different parts of our presentation. But for the record, I'm Todd Parfit, Director of the Department of Environmental Quality. And what I am going to talk about, first, just an update on COVID and the budget outlook for the agency. Then we're going to shift, and it's a little bit off on the agenda, but if it's all right with you, I'd like to move into the coal bed methane reservoir discussion. And then from there, then we'll talk about the cease and transfer program, storage tank program, landfill remediation, and then that'll just transition nicely into the cease and transfer bill draft. So with that, I just wanted to kind of give an update on COVID and how that's impacted the agency. Obviously, as with all agencies, we've seen budgetary impacts, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But most importantly is how do we continue to conduct our business and keep our staff and public safe? So we began teleworking back in March, and we've have about 80% of the staff are teleworking. And I have to give a lot of credit to ETS to get everybody set up at home and be able to do the work that we do through the telework system. And that's worked very well. I think that there might be a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for, but just a little bit of wearing on folks continuing with the telework. There's some things that you just can't do from home. And so some folks are really looking forward to the day when we can come back into the office. Now, one of the things that we have had to do is because we have so much teleworking going on and being able to provide the services to the regulated community and to the public, we've made some technological changes. And some of those important ones are there's a lot more e-signatures going on right now. So I see many of the documents electronically and sign them electronically. We have more virtual meetings. That's good from the standpoint that it cuts down on the amount of transportation costs that we have. Some folks like it, some don't. I think the virtual meetings work for a lot of things, but you give up the hallway discussions, as they're termed, and the ability to have other conversations. Other things that we're doing is that we've increased our capabilities to take electronic permit application submittals, report submittals. That has been appreciated by the regulated community. We're also transitioning on electronic public comments. We've done that with rules. We've done it with larger, more complicated permit actions where there's a lot of interest. We will be, over the next several months, transitioning many of our other permitting activities to the electronic comment system that we currently use. Would say that the impact in terms of the work the agency does, looking at the permitting timeframes, we really haven't seen too much impact there. There are a few instances in some programs where the permitting has taken a little bit longer. On the inspection side, inspections were down early on just because there were a lot of uncertainties and a lot of concern about the contact during inspections. And we do honor the facility or community requirements related to COVID, and are taking the necessary safety precautions with our staff as they continue to do their work. We have done a little bit of a shift where we're doing some, what I would call desk or report audits, where we don't actually have to go to the facility, but we can look at the documentation with the regulated entity. And then self audits seem to be down. We had a lot of interest in the self audit program, but that has dropped off during the COVID period. In terms of compliance rates, they're generally good. I don't think we've seen an uptick or a down in compliance rates. It's been pretty steady. We did come out with a policy on enforcement discretion to provide some certainty to the regulated community if they ran into a situation where, as a result of COVID, that they were unable to perform certain required activities. And I would say largely that's been used in the air quality division, and primarily where certain certifications are required to do testing, and either an individual or a company was unable to get the required updates to their certification because it wasn't made available because of COVID. That's the most frequent instance of the use of the COVID policy. Now, EPA did something similar. We modeled ours quite largely off of what EPA had done. And EPA back, I think it was the end of August, they terminated the enforcement discretion policy that they had. I haven't felt that that's appropriate at this time. So we continue to have that enforcement discretion policy in place. So that's what I have on the COVID. I'll stop there before I get into the budget and see if there's any questions there. Okay.
Questions there for Director Parfit?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Greer, welcome to the meeting.
Yeah, sorry, my day job got in the way. I apologize.
I'm glad to see you're not in jail.
I've not done anything that would deserve that comment. So, Director Parfit, and this will maybe tie in just a little bit. as you talk about the budget. But has COVID affected in any way the mission of DEQ to preserve our primacy within the state? You feel comfortable where you are, that you continue to do your mission effectively and responsibly and responsibly?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mr. Chairman. Representative Greer, yes, I believe that we've adjusted accordingly to address the COVID environment, if you will. We still are taking the necessary precautions with our staff, following the CDC guidelines and health department guidelines. And we're able to fulfill the requirements under our primacy programs. Now I say that related to COVID, and I'm going to get into it a little bit more when we start talking about the budget implications, not just from COVID, but from other sources. But the short answer is yes, we're able to maintain the requirements with primacy programs. I will say that there was initially with COVID a drop off in the number of inspections because of the concerns and uncertainties. We did work with our federal agencies, and we have what's called a PPA, an agreement on our grants annually. And those agreements that we have the required number of inspections for the different types of facilities or different types of programs. And so they understand some of the difficulties in meeting some of those agreed upon inspection numbers, but we're back to, I would say, a normal level of inspections. That's a quick summary, but I'll talk some more about that as we go through the budget.
Other questions? Other questions for Todd Parfit? Other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So the next area that I wanted to just cover would be the budget on a high level. The governor came up with a three-step approach to address the budget issues. Step one was back in April, where there was a hiring freeze and a hold on contracts that were greater than $100,000 in general funds. Step two was the first 10% general fund reduction. And that went into effect July 1st. So the 10% that I'm going to give you high level on actually went into effect already. So we have in our FY 21-22 budget, $37.8 million of general funds. And that represents 50% of the agency's budget. And now you have to exclude the AML program, because AML kind of skews things. And most of that money is passed through for contracts. So if you look at our operating budget, 37.8 million of general funds, 25% federally funded, and then 25% other, such as fees. So the big cuts in the first round, or step two rather, first off was in the administration information technology. We cut 1.7 million from our budget for IT work. A lot of that was related to air quality and water quality upgrades to their systems. And I think as we talked about this last year, we have some systems that are using access database systems. And so they're quite antiquated and out of date. We were looking to upgrade those and make some improvements there. Now about 1.2 million of that 1.7 million is one-time money that we had requested last year. About $500,000 is then associated with operation and maintenance type activities and upgrades. And so that's the big cut that was part of step two. The next big area was in solid and hazardous waste, $945,000 reduction, and that included two positions associated with landfill permitting other waste management permitting, and then landfill remediation. We also took a big reduction in emergency response. So we had about $400,000 a year for emergency response, and we basically cut that out of the budget. And then we eliminated the pollution prevention program. That was one area where we did actually have to eliminate a program. It's not a primacy program, but an important program nonetheless. But for the time being, we will not have that program, and we always incorporate pollution prevention measures into the work that we do anyway, but just wanted to point that out. And then the next area was water quality division, kind of the same thing. We repurposed a position so that they're doing more Department of Defense work, particularly related to missile site cleanups and the like. But again, we cut out $400,000 in emergency response monies that we had available. And that's historically been used for things like the Gillette Madison pipeline project. If you recall, there was an issue with some of the wells that were installed there and some concerns over water quality changes as they were testing those wells. And we were able to utilize those funds to actually work with the community and the landowners that had affected wells and get to a solution on that. Another area where we took a reduction was in contractual services. So doing some of the more proactive work related to what they call forever chemicals. These are what's called the PFOA, PFAS. I think I've talked to you about this in the past, but these are the firefighting foams. The PFAS it's in a lot of products: carpet, pajamas, cooking pots and pans. It's even in dental floss. But we'll continue to follow these items and these issues, but through our organizations, we have done some studies to find out if it's a prevalent issue in Wyoming. We've identified some of the military installations that have identified PFAS in their groundwater. And also harmful algal blooms is another thing that we'll not be able to be as aggressive with, trying to get to an understanding of what the root cause is in those particular areas, because we're seeing an uptick in the HABs, or harmful cyanobacteria blooms, in our reservoirs, and to be able to come up with a way to understand what the cause is and how to address those, we'll have fewer dollars for that. And then lastly, I just want to mention the air quality division. We reduced their budget in this first round of cuts by $194,000. And that was all with positions. We reduced the air quality division by 4 full-time employees. So step 3 of the budget cuts is up to an additional 10%. So that'd be another 3.7 million. Right now, we're currently going through the budget process, so I can't give you any of the details on that at this point, but I would say it's fair to say that there will be an increase in fees. And in fact, there were some things that we were looking at that we went ahead and implemented anyway, because in order for them to achieve the benefit to the budget, we needed to implement before we actually have that going through and being part of our budget. So, and those are in 3 areas. First is an increase in fees. So we did a review of all of our fee programs to ensure that we were charging the appropriate fee per statute. And we did identify one, which was within the hazardous waste program, where we weren't charging the full amount. So we've incorporated that into the fee invoices that went out in July. And so those have already been implemented. We looked at reducing some air quality monitors, and we have a number of monitors throughout the state, and we've decommissioned 4 of those air quality monitoring stations, and where we determined that the need for those particular monitors had been met, and it was appropriate to move on from those monitoring stations. And then lastly, travel. And travel is kind of an easy one in some respects, but back in April, I basically ended any out-of-state travel that wasn't necessary for the program functioning. And then in-state travel has been reduced dramatically through virtual meetings and the like. So those are the 3 areas that I guess I can talk to you about. But we should have that, or the governor will have his budget finalized later this month. The upside from my perspective is that we went through this process. We were able to ensure that we could continue to perform the mission of the agency and be timely with our permitting actions. But we didn't have to have any reduction in force. We didn't have to terminate somebody that was in a position. And I think that was an important part of our process, was to ensuring that we didn't have somebody lose their job as a result of this. The reductions of the positions that we're seeing are due to vacancies. So we identify them early, and then we eliminate them through a vacancy. So back to your question, Representative Greer, no adverse impact to the primacy programs. The federal agencies are less concerned with permitting timeframes, more concerned about, are we appropriately establishing permit requirements. Their biggest area of interest is in inspections, compliance, and enforcement. And I will tell you, for primacy programs, we have 18 primacy programs in air quality, and that's kind of unique because it's not really a primacy package like we would normally see. It's done through what's called a state implementation plan, and we just update those state implementation plans as the rules might change on the federal side. In water quality, we have 14 programs where we have primacy. Solid waste has 3, and then land quality has 2. The biggest impact, I would say, when we look at not just primacy programs, but our interaction with the federal government, is our ability to review new rules and guidelines as they come out. I think what you'll see is that we'll, because one of the positions that we gave up as part of the first round of budget cuts was a position related to the rule review and guideline review program in air quality. We still have staff in there, but we're going to have to be a little bit more selective moving forward as to which ones that we want to spend our resources on, and then rely more heavily on organizations like the Environmental Council of States, Intermountain or Interstate Mining Compact Commission, and then the specific media organizations where there are all the 50 states participate in. And then the last thing I'll say regarding budget, there was a furlough that was implemented back in August. So essentially, those staff that have a salary of greater than $65,000 per year are taking 1 furlough day per month for 6 months. So August through January. That's for all agencies. But for DEQ, that affects 70 positions out of 260. So the cost, just to give you some perspective on that, to the employee is about a 2.5% reduction in their annual salary, just to give you some perspective on that. So with that, that's the update on the budget for DEQ, and happy to take any questions on that.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wondered if you could perhaps identify any opportunities for streamlining regulations in not just in the current fiscal environment, but just in normal times. Are there opportunities for that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, yes, there are always opportunities there, and that's something that we do on a routine basis. We have looked at, and this is kind of a carryover from several years ago, where we look at consolidating rules, streamlining rules, so that we have fewer rule packages, fewer pages of rules. And now I would add to that, the process now as we go through this is that the attorneys that we have looking at our rule packages are also looking at streamlining those rule packages as well, and making them, I guess, clearer and easier to understand.
Go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. So as you look at those streamlining opportunities, are there opportunities also for shortening the time frame, in terms of the decision and cycling, and as regarding, projects and whatnot? You mentioned the electronic signature process and more online and so forth, but is there other opportunities? My purpose of the question really is looking for areas where we can use technology to reduce cost, as well as shorten the time frame to get the productive points.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, yeah, I think there's always opportunities there, and that's the area that we have and COVID has kind of accelerated, I think, our look into some of those efficiencies. I think the electronic signature was a big one, but we have to be careful with some of these that we don't run afoul with some federal requirements, and electronic signature would be one of those that took several years to get set up, simply because EPA has a certain requirement for how you go through the electronic permit or electronic signature process. Not so much on our end, but on the regulated community. So when they're certifying on a report or something that gets submitted to us, we have to have a system that meets all of the federal requirements as well. But we are looking at ways to essentially become more paperless. We started this initiative many years ago. Some of you may remember, but there was a request that we do what we needed to do to become substantially paperless. It's kind of a tough one because we understand that can provide you the efficiencies, but that's one of the areas where we made some of the budget cuts as well. So our ability is somewhat limited in terms of what we can adopt due to budgetary constraints as well.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Parfit, thank you for your comments this morning. My question has to do with the historic use of firefighting foam. And currently, as I'm sure you're aware, there are some class action suits that are starting to be formed around the nation. The idea being that similar to asbestosis or tobacco, that first in line will have the best opportunity to recover. Do you anticipate that there will be a coordinated effort with regard to the state of Wyoming to participate in that? Or do you think that it's better for the individual entities to pursue whatever actions they deem to be best at this time?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, it's a good question, and we are tracking some of the legal actions that are developing in other states. I've shared that information with the Attorney General's office. At this point, I can tell you that we've identified PFOA, PFOS constituents at the Air Force Base here in Cheyenne, and a few other locations of military locations. We only have one other that I'm aware of, and we've done some testing, and we've done some. We hired a contractor to identify those areas that would be most likely to have PFOA, PFOS contamination in their groundwater, and we're moving along with that contract. But right now, the military installations and then one incident up at the Jackson Hole Airport. Those are the only locations that we've identified at this point. So we would have to weigh all that in our decision making on whether or not we would want to participate in any of these legal actions.
Follow up, Representative McGuire?
No, thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, getting back to the budget discussion, and you've acknowledged, I think, that it shouldn't affect performance obligations, but with regard to kind of the long term of permitting timelines and of getting things done, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on what the effect will be. And, you know, I think we're sensitive on this committee to the fact that about 60% of the state's actual revenue coming to the state to pay for our programs ends up with a stamp from DEQ on it of one form or another. It's permitted in some way because it's coming from mineral extractive industry, and most of that comes through your shop. So if use are slowed down due to lack of resources, that slows down the performance of the industry that pays the bills and actually is a net loss. I've always seen your shop as one with a positive ROI. The dollars in tend to come back out magnified. So I'm concerned that our short-term savings might result in a long-term cost, so that it's not actually cost effective, despite the fact that it looks like a cut today. And I want to know what your thoughts are on that for both the short term, and I suspect it's fine for the short term, but the long term as well. And are we going to be able to operate as nimbly and as effectively as we have in the past, or are we going to lead to slowdowns in development of the business and industry that we need to recover?
Okay, so that a good question, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss. There's a lot to unpack there. First thing I would say is, one, if I gave the message that there would be no impact because of these cuts, I gave you the wrong message. There will be impacts. But what we tried to do, and what I appreciated what the governor allowed us to do, was to strategically go in and identify those areas where we would have the least amount of impact, to just what you're saying. We recognize that if we don't have the right resources in place and the right program structure in place, that we can be an impediment to economic development. And so that was certainly a consideration in the first 10% cuts. And so we tried to be strategic about that. Now, in the short term, that sounds good, but if you look at the fact that we cut out 1.7 million in information technology, I would say, yeah, from a long-term standpoint, that's something that we'll probably have to come back to the joint appropriations or to the legislature and the governor and talk about how we're going to become substantially paperless, because there's great value in that, not only to the regulated community and the timing that we'll be able to see and eliminating the paperwork. I think the value in doing that is in space that's necessary because we have less paper, in archiving costs. Now, some of that's lost because you have archiving costs electronically that you have to pay for as well, but also the efficiency for the agency dealing with electronic documents is, I think, of great value. And that's a good justification for moving to the electronic public comment. If we can do that in the right way, we can organize that. We don't have to retype a lot of information or re-enter a lot of information. It's already organized for you. So, I mean, that's one part of it. The other thing that I was thinking about is, keeping in mind that this 10% reduction in July is on top of an 11% reduction that we took in fiscal year 2018. And then we're looking at additional reductions as well. But again, being able to look at it strategically rather than saying 10% across the board, everybody's going to make that cut. That would have been difficult, much more difficult to manage. Being able to be selective on where we take those reductions has been helpful. So anyway, with that, so will there be an impact? Yes. Will it take longer in some programs to process permits? Yes. Hopefully with the other efficiencies that we're looking at and the IT improvements that we're making, that will offset it enough that we'll be able to meet the demands of whatever industry is looking for permits from us.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss, yes, follow up.
Two follow-ups. The first is with regard to fees, and you had some discussion on that already. There are circumstances where industry is actually very interested and willing to pay fees if it expedites the process efficiency and gets things done more quickly. There are others where they don't want to pay fees, but you know what those, you know what the differences are there, and I think you know them well. Are you taking advantage of those areas and optimizing towards those areas with your fee schedule to ensure that where industry needs to get things done quickly and they're willing to pay heightened fees, that you use that as a resource and a tool? And honestly, are you fully enabled to do that, or would we have to provide you with additional authority statutorily or through the Appropriations Committee to enable you to take advantage of those areas where we know industry just needs to get things done, and for them, quick is better than low cost slow?
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, there are three parts to this answer. So the first off, getting back to the comments that I made earlier, we've done a review of all of the fee programs that we have in statute and ensured that we are now charging the full fee that we can by statute for all those programs, and we are doing that. So the second part of that is, yeah, we can look at other programs to do a fee, and that it varies. If you look, the Environmental Council of States has done a report that has shown where states fall out. Some states charge more fees than others and have less general fund contribution, and it depends on the program as well. So I think there's opportunity to take a look at the programs that we implement, and can we charge a fee rather than general fund or federal funds for those. The cautionary note on that, we looked at this in the Surface Water Discharge Program, the NPDS program, years ago, and right now there's a $200 fee for that permit on an annual basis. And that fee only covers our work with either modeling, monitoring, but it doesn't cover administrative costs. And the reason it doesn't cover administrative costs because we were told at that time by EPA that if we charged a fee for the administrative costs for the program, we would lose the federal contribution to that. And we didn't want to give up the federal contribution to the NPDS program to implement the fee. So those are the kinds of things that we would have to look at, but I think there's opportunity to explore that, to see where we could charge new fees or additional fees by the regulated communities. That would be basically a user fee. The third thing that I would mention is that in air quality, we have what's called the Title V program, which are the large air emitting facilities, and they pay a fee for their permit, as well as for the processing of the permit. So that's how we basically fund that program. And then we have what's called the New Source Review Program, and we charge a fee for that as well. We're currently looking at that fee structure because, especially with the Title V, oddly enough, as the emissions go down, the costs go up. Not the overall cost, but the cost per hour go up because we have fewer emissions paying into the fee. So we're looking at adjusting that. Right now, we have I think it's not the lowest, the second lowest fee for the air quality program in the country. And we may need to look at adjusting that to cover the costs of the AML program to keep up with the workload there and not have backlog. So anyway, so I hope that answered your question, Senator.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator.
Final follow-up on that, thanks. And thank you, Director. That does answer my questions, and I'm glad to hear that you're looking into that. And I would ask you if you need statutory changes to come to us and talk to us about it. We do know that there are areas where industry would be very receptive, I think, to increased fees as long as it leads to better productivity, better efficiency for them. And then the final thing I'll say is that the reality of the circumstances we're in is with budget cuts, everyone says, well, we'll try and give you as much as we can, even though our budget's being cut. But the reality is you typically get less for less. That's the reality of budgets. And if DEQ finds itself in a circumstance where it's not able to expeditiously carry out its mission to get permits stamped and signed off on and approved and with due diligence, then again, I'll ask that you come to this committee and let us know as soon as is humanly possible, because we need to make sure that these budget cuts don't prevent the economic development that we actually need to develop more revenue. And right now, with the revenue structure we have and the tax structure we have, it's the minerals sector that can actually provide that impetus in the future. So we need to make sure that we're not holding it back through our decisions over the next couple of years. So I appreciate kind of those needs. And if things are slowing down or if you're facing challenges, that you let this committee know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director.
Representative Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Rothfuss covered almost all of my questions, but one, and I happen to agree with his comments 100%. Director, there is just one area I didn't cover, and again, during budget cuts, we all know we have to do what we need to do, right? It's a difficult time. It's going to be hard for everyone. One of the things that is just a concern, and I'd just like to get your comments. I'm aware of significant retirements within the department. And a lot of these programs, especially these primacy programs, require expertise, and they're not $35,000 a year jobs. And so I'm just curious if maybe you could comment as to, how's your bench? What do you look like? I mean, our future's unknown, but I still hope that there is opportunity for our extractive industries to be able to contribute to our to the state of Wyoming. How's your bench?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Greer, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Our bench, I think, is strong, but I say that with some caveats. We did have we are seeing some retirements of some of our most experienced folks. Alan Edwards being one. He was the deputy director and the abandoned mine lands administrator for 10 years. And he retired at the end of last month. And that's a big loss of institutional knowledge. His position has been backfilled by Luke Esch, who's with us here today. So he is the deputy director, which comes with lots of additional responsibility and no additional funding. The abandoned mine land program is for the interim being managed by Luke as well. As far as other retirements, yeah, we're seeing some other retirements, and I get a report periodically where I look at who's eligible for retirement, and what does that mean if that individual were to leave. There was a time where I had in my mind who I would replace all vacant administrative positions if they were to leave for some reason. That becomes more difficult as we start backfilling, but we do have good staff. It is a challenge, and I guess the point that I would like to put out there is that recruitment and retention is really important for us, and it's difficult with some of our positions, particularly our more senior engineering positions. We have a very difficult time filling those positions when they do become vacant, because we just aren't as competitive with some other, well, certainly with industry, we're typically not competitive. And again, it depends on the market, but typically that's the case. But we've had offers made to individuals in other states, and they've turned it down mainly because of the salary for those senior level positions. So it is concerning in some areas.
Other questions? Other questions? Seeing none.
All right.
Todd, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're going to now talk about the coal bed methane reservoirs, the bonding and the reclamation. And so I'm going to run through a few points just to give you an update. And then if you got any specifics that you want to get into, that's why I've asked Kevin Frederick to join us. He can get into any of the details that you'd like. So the DEQ started the bonding program for on-channel, and this is an important distinction, for on-channel reservoirs back in August of 2005. We don't bond or regulate the off-channel reservoirs. The bonding for the off-channel reservoirs is done through the Oil and Gas Commission, which you heard a little bit from Mark Watson on that, or the Office of State Lands, or BLM, depending on the land ownership. So we had a total universe of on-channel reservoirs bonded of about 800.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart has a question.
Thank you, Mr.
Burkhart, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Parfit, real quickly, would you define on-channel, off-channel, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good question. So on-channel is within a drainage, essentially. So usually in the uplands, but it's going to be an ephemeral drainage of some sort. Off-channel would be outside of the normal drainage or normal water of the state, if you will. So not waters of the U.S., but the water of the state. So we have about 800 on-channel reservoirs that were at one time bonded by DEQ. There's approximately 3 times as many off-channel pits. So there's around 2,400 off-channel pits at the peak and 800 on-channel. Of those 800, about 50% of those have been resolved, meaning they've either been transferred to the landowner, they've been reclaimed, or they were never constructed. Now, when they are transferred to the landowner, that has to be coordinated with and have the concurrence of the state engineer's office to make sure it doesn't infringe upon water rights. So most of what was resolved in that first 50% was transferred to the landowner. About 270 of those were transferred to the landowner for their use. So that leaves in existence 389 reservoirs awaiting some sort of resolution. And I'm going to break that down for you. So those 389 reservoirs that still are waiting on some resolution, 156 of those are still in use by the company. So that's about 40%. Then we have another 91 that are in the process of transferring to the landowner. So that's another 23%. So about 47%, right, 37% are pending reclamation or transfer to the landowner. So that's the universe that really we're dealing with is 142 bonded on-channel reservoirs. Now, of those, we had 3 companies file bankruptcy, and we forfeited the bond on 1 and came to a settlement with the other 2. So with the bond forfeiture and the settlement, the DEQ is contracting to reclaim 17 reservoirs currently. Of the remainder, the 125 that remain, those are in discussion. We're ongoing discussions either between the company and the landowner to see if they will take or want to keep the reservoir, or they will go into reclamation if they can't be resolved that way. So there's a total of 17 companies that were bonded or that are currently bonded. The total bond that we hold is 16 million. Of the ones that were forfeited or settled, that accounts for about 3.3 million. Then we have another 3 that we have sent letters that we've notified them we are going to begin forfeiture on their bond because they haven't come to resolution. And so that's in process. So that's just a quick snapshot of where we are. There's not a lot of activity that we undertake until we forfeit the bond. And to forfeit the bond, we have to provide notice and then go to the Environmental Quality Council to do that. So we have 3 that we've initiated that process, additional ones that we've initiated that process on. But that's about $600,000 of bond that would be forfeited for 5 reservoirs. So I'll take any questions, or Kevin can take any questions that you might have.
Director Parfit, help me here. When you say we sacrifice the bond, or we forfeit the bond, what do you mean we're forfeiting the bond?
So, Mr. Chairman, the company has either a surety or a cash bond with the DEQ. We can utilize that bond in the event that the company fails to reclaim or fails to have the ability to reclaim the reservoir, or the landowner has not taken ownership of the reservoir. But in order for us to utilize the bond the funds from the bond or the cash bond, we have to formally forfeit, go through the forfeiture procedure. So the company would forfeit the bond to the DEQ, and then we would use the bond to reclaim the facility.
Yes, we wouldn't forfeit the bond. The company would forfeit the bond. Then we'd use the bond, right?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I may have misspoke there.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Representative Greer.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Director of Committee, this follow-up is to our inquiry back this spring when we were looking at, how do we initiate or push forward with the reclamation to basically push work into the economy, right? And so, Director, then to follow up on with the 3 companies that you have forfeited already, has that work begun? Have those contracts been issued? And then a follow-up on that with the 3 that you're putting into the process now, how long does that take between starting and then actually seeing somebody take a dozer out there and start to work on the pond or the reservoir?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Greer, for the first question, yes, there are contracts in place. We have 2 contracts covering, I believe, 17 reservoirs that were where the bonds were forfeited, or we have a settlement. And so those are in construction now. Contracts are let and they're doing the work. On the 3 forfeiture notices, for those, like I said, we have to go through the EQC to forfeit the bond. I don't know how long it would take after that. I think Kevin may have some better idea on the timing there.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. The procedure itself, forfeiture before the, as we refer to it, and recognizing Senator Anderson's comment that, the company is actually forfeiting, not DEQ. But through the EQC, that process took roughly 3 months or so. And in this case, it was a relatively easy forfeiture process because the company was bankrupt and had posted a cash bond rather than a surety bond. So there was no third party involved. And then for DEQ to actually access the funding and implement reclamation, that process, before we actually finalized a contract, probably took about a year. And part of that time frame was developing the scope of work and the contract, putting the contract out in a request for proposals, and then taking proposals, interviewing proponents that had submitted to do the work, selecting the final proponent to enter into a contract with, and then develop the contract itself, get it signed through the Attorney General's office, et cetera, and then begin work. So it's a fairly long process from start to finish.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Okay, Director, so I try to keep my comments neutral and objective and productive, but wow, 18 months? It's a long time. It's a long time.
I wouldn't disagree with you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Furphy, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, let me ask, these contracts, are most of these contracts with Wyoming firms? So they benefit Wyoming employees?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Murphy, yes, the contracts that we have are with Wyoming companies, and I believe they're out of Lander.
Any other questions? Other questions on that topic? Hearing none, go ahead, Director Parfit.
So, Mr. Chairman, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Luke Ash, who's the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division Administrator, AML Interim Administrator, and Deputy Director. So he's wearing a lot of hats right at the moment, but he'll walk you through the reports that we have for you on solid waste and the storage tank program.
Representative Henderson has a question before you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the 18-month period that was referenced before, are there any ways that we can accelerate that process or shorten it?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, yes, in our conversations that we've been having internally, we're looking at particularly those 125 and how we expedite the process of getting to a resolution with the, is the landowner going to take it or are they going to reclaim? So that's one part of it that we'll be looking at expediting. Even though we may not be doing the work, we want to move that process along if they're no longer utilizing those reservoirs. As far as the contractual piece, I would agree as well that you know, on the forfeiture, we will do what we can to expedite that process, recognizing that we still have to work through the Environmental Quality Council, and sometimes we're negotiating with the company and their attorneys on the best way to move forward in terms of reclaiming the reservoirs. But yes, that's heard loud and clear.
Mr. Director, are most of those reservoirs water quality, ag quality, or drinking water for livestock quality?
Mr. Chairman, yes. If you know, depending on if there's water in it or not. Keeping in mind that these are in upland areas typically, and you know, whether or not and that's probably one decision point for the landowner, and whether or not they want to retain that or not is how much water is being retained within the reservoir.
Okay, go ahead. Mr. Lukesh, you look good with all those hats on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's good to see you all today. As you may recall, we discussed a lot of these programs back at the May Minerals Committee meeting, but this is just some updates for you all. So the first report that I'm going to address today is the annual storage tank program report that was provided back in the middle of October. As a bit of background, in 1990, the legislature created the storage tank program after recognizing the burden that maintaining the federal requirements of the underground storage tank program would have on small and rural storage tank owners and operators. So as a part of this program, they created the Storage Tank Corrective Action Account, which funds the cleanups, and the Financial Responsibility Account, which is the federal requirement that protects third parties from releases. Now, Wyoming's program is unique in how it addresses releases. Other states, they approach it as more of a whack-a-mole, where if they catch a release over here, they go and try to catch that one. We try to prioritize our sites based on the environmental receptors in the area, and then group them together. So if we have some lower priority sites in the same area as at some high priority sites, we'll put them in one project. So we can have one contract that addresses all of those and have one individual contractor to go take care of it. And so this allows the storage tank program to reduce the overall cleanup costs per site using those economies of scale. And just as a summary, so in the report, it shows as of June 30th, the storage tank program has remediated a total of 1,334 contaminated sites. We have corrective action ongoing at 298 contaminated sites. And we have 7 contaminated sites that are scheduled to come into corrective action, I believe in the spring. And remediation is also going on at third-party sites that have been affected by releases. During FY20, we conducted 764 on-site inspections. And we also had a compliance rating of 87%, which was one of the highest compliance ratings in the country. The average compliance rating from other states is usually around 45%. So we're very proud of our compliance program. I believe we achieved this through a lot of our license requirements and testing requirements. We worked very closely with the Wyoming Petroleum Marketers Association to make sure that the regulated community understands what the regulations are. So it's really a feather in the hat of the state of Wyoming that we have such great compliance. That's kind of a summary of the storage tank program. I might pause there before moving on to some of the other reports.
You're very careful not to call it the LUST program. Is that intentional?
Well, it's just one less letter to say. Representative Burkhart, do you have a comment?
Mr. Chairman?
You have a comment, Mr. Burkhart?
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Question, and I'm on table 5 in your report. Just briefly, when I look at, and I'm on page 2 of that table, when I look at Riverton 3, Riverton 2, Wind River, and then Southwest Cheyenne, South Central Cheyenne, you know, the costs are over 15 million. Were they particularly bad areas, or is there just a lot of work there?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, this kind of goes back to our grouping several sites into one project. So, and the one you referenced, the Riverton 1, 2, 3 and Wind River project, that one dates back to the first part of the program in the mid-90s. And that project, it started with potentially, you know, up to 15 projects in that area. And because it's geographically similar, we try to approach it having one project. And then within that project, we have different site levels of sites within that area. So while we haven't eliminated the project, even though the number of sites within that has gone down. So starting with 15, that project may be down to 5 or 6 cleanup sites that just really haven't been able to reach groundwater cleanup standards yet. And, you know, remediation in that southwest part of the state is sometimes difficult due to the tightness of the soils. And if you're using a groundwater injection program, it can take some time to get those injection programs to really work effectively.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I'll move on to the next report. This is the landfill remediation report that was submitted back in June. As you recall, in 2013, the legislature created the Municipal Solid Waste Landfill Remediation Program. And under this program, DEQ would oversee and fund up to 75% of the cost of investigating and remediating contamination at landfills for up to 10 years. So in 2015, we had a report put together where we had the highest 11 priority facilities with an estimated remediation cost of about $44 million. In that same report, we projected the total cost of remediation at all the facilities at about $280 million. So over the years, we've been working with through the list, actually. We're still working with some of the higher priority landfills. These remediations can take quite a while. In June of 2020, we submitted our report providing an update of the work that's been done so far and what we anticipate in the future. So in brief, I'll kind of touch on what we've been done at the 5 of the highest 11 priority landfills. But before I do that, I would like to say that the success of this program is largely attributed to the leadership of this committee in creating the program and making sure that it can move forward. So in Casper is the first landfill to address. Casper, we installed an active gas collection system and flare. We also put additional cap over 14 acres of the site. We've installed new groundwater wells and methane wells at the border so we can try to address some off-site methane migration. And we're also evaluating whether the existing remedies that we've implemented can reduce the contamination to the point where we need to evaluate whether additional remedies are needed. Campbell County, I don't know if you all were in the Gillette area this summer. You probably saw a lot of activity going on at the old landfill there in the middle of town. We constructed a brand new flexible membrane liner over the 80 acres and installed an active gas system as well. And so weather permitting, we're planning on trying to seed the capped area late this fall to see if we can address that at least before the winter. We're also working with the city of Sheridan, its landfill. Over the past few years, we've conducted what's called the nature and extent study, which takes a look at how bad is the contamination. We've also developed an assessment of corrective measures report for that facility, which proposes different remedial alternatives for what we may do with that landfill. But the last year, we've kind of taken a pause because we're transitioning. So under the program, either the DEQ can take the lead on doing the remediation, or the operator can take the lead and DEQ is kind of a partner with it, where we still review and have to approve all the remediation activities. But so Sheridan is transitioning from a DEQ-led to an operator-led. So we've kind of had to go through a process of wrapping up the contracts with our prior consultant and transitioning to a new consultant that the city is going to propose. We've also moved forward with additional work with the town of Guernsey, city of Riverton, city of Newcastle, and Uinta County, as they are transitioning into more of an active role in our program. And with that, I'll stop for a moment to see if there's some questions regarding the landfill remediation program.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just start with a comment. The Wyoming or the Casper landfill is right on the approach to the airport. And so I've kind of been watching the disposal of the wind turbine blades. And the first time I went over, I thought, wow, that's a lot. And then I keep going over and it's more and more. And so I would be curious if we could get some kind of a feeling for how much space is being taken up by those wind turbine blades, either as a percentage or a historical. But I've taken a couple pictures of it, and it's an astounding portion of the Casper landfill that's being taken up with these wind turbine blades. And they're, of course, there forever. And I think it would be interesting to find out, maybe in the memory of our former representative here in Natrona County, finding out how much space is being used and how much space you anticipate will continue to be used, because it doesn't seem like they're stopping. And I'd just like to find out, what we're looking at as a percentage of that landfill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, I don't have that information with me today. I do know that the Casper landfill has a very large permitted boundary, but I'll check into it and see if I can find a percentage of what the turbine blade disposal would do inside their permit boundary, and I'll get back to you.
The interesting thing about that is it is not where we have put a bladder in to protect the environment. This is all being installed in the sand dunes around the site. So they're not wasting any of our controlled bladder disposal area. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. A follow-up on the turbine blades. In a quick question, we put together a new program which would allow a turbine blade disposal at as backfill for coal mines. And Mr. Esch, you were involved in kind of putting that together and working it out. I was curious if there was anything to report on that, whether there's any interest or any discussions, or if you've got any updates for us, that'd be great.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, and Todd may know this as well, but I know that the draft rule package to allow that practice to happen at the landfills was working its way through the Land Quality Division. I believe it was presented to the Land Quality Board, I want to say last month, but I don't have any additional information right now on that, but that's certainly something we can provide you as well.
Okay, Luke, go ahead. Doesn't seem like there's any more questions.
Let me just write that down so I can follow up on it. So now moving on to the final report. This is the Cease and Transfer Program report. And as you may recall, in 2013, the legislature created the Municipal Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program, where the department would work in cooperation with the Office of State Lands and Investments to provide funding assistance of up to 75% of eligible project costs for landfill operators who wanted to cease receipt of municipal solid waste and transfer it to regional landfills, as well as assistance with closing their unlined landfill. So since that time, the department has worked with the Office of State Lands and Investments, as well as the solid waste operators around the state to develop the infrastructure to transfer their waste to regional line facilities, as well as closing these unlined landfills. In mid-October, the department presented its updated priority list to the Minerals Committee, as well as the Appropriations Committee. And so this list has 19 facilities for a total estimated project cost of $27,881,000. Excuse me. That list has 7 transfer stations for a total of $8.1 million, and 12 closures for would cost about $19.7 million. So the changes from the prior priority lists are a result of 2 facilities being removed because they received funding, as well as 1 facility being added to the list as upon the request from the operator. Also, the list's total cost has been adjusted because 2 projects provided updated project estimates, resulting in increased project costs for those facilities. As of today, we have funded 31 projects, 11 transfer stations, and 20 landfill closures. So the current estimated cost for the remaining, well, I mentioned that it's $27.8 million for the remaining facilities. And as of today, we have a total of $17.8 million remaining in the program account, with 11.2 in grants and 6.6 in loans. And with that, I will pause to see if you all have any questions.
Any questions? Any questions? Representative Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll probably do this a couple of times during this meeting, but this program was stood up by this committee, and Mr. Esch referred to the success of it. And a lot of that success goes to subcommittee member on that, Senator Coe, who this will be his last minerals meeting, and appreciate his hard work on that. Want to make sure we all point that out, Senator. Thank you.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, don't forget Senator Rothfuss. We're really the garbage experts.
Been known as trash experts, yes. Have a reputation, yeah. Okay, Luke, you want to go ahead? Oh, Senator Coe.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a question on the list, 19 Park County landfills, TS rolling stock. I'm sure that's transfer stations rolling stock. And I've been critical because we have a transfer station in Powell. And of course, we closed that landfill. And we put incredible amounts of money into the Cody landfill. Powell is using these assets to ultimately transfer everything they have to Billings, where they get a better fee. I'm just curious about that. Again, I think I've asked this question before. It concerns me. They're saving some money doing that, transferring to Billings, but here the state of Wyoming's investing in transfer station rolling stock for the benefit of the Powell community, and they're taking their garbage to Billings, and so it's discerning to me to see that continue to happen. So, any comments?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Coe, I certainly understand the frustration. The state of Wyoming, we have trash leaving the state for outside facilities in various portions of the state. But I think it goes back to the purpose of the program is to try to make sure it's more effective for communities to be able to dispose of their waste in a line facility. I understand the frustration, but I don't think we have the tools to really address something like that. Aside from the conversations we maintain with the operators in Powell, we try to maintain communications with both Park County plus the town to make sure that if when that contract comes up with Billings, if there's a way that we can provide some infrastructure that might make it easier to maintain it in the state, we'll be there.
Luke, help me with that. Why would Montana want to take trash from our communities? Is it profitable for them to do that?
Mr. Chairman, the facility in Billings is quite large. It's a quite large line facility, I believe. And so each ton of garbage that comes into their facility I guess becomes easier them. It's just more, it's kind of like a business. If you have more business coming in the door, then you are making more of a profit. And it's less cost for you able to charge your other customers.
Wow. Oh, I bet they wouldn't get away with that in Western Montana. Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, for one, am fully supportive of sending all of our garbage to Montana.
I couldn't agree more. Send some to Colorado too.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we were.
Representative Burkhart, I knew you'd have a question.
Looking at your list at number 8, the city of Rollins has spent quite a bit of money to close their landfill. Is the remaining, it was 78 or 780,000 on this, the final payment, so to speak? I know they've capped it. They have off-gassing facilities installed. What's the remaining money for?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart. The remaining $780,000 is for the rest of the landfill. They approached this, I believe it was back in 2016, and proposed capping, and I can't recall the entire acreage, but capping about 75% of the acreage at that time with assistance from the program, and then leaving the rest so they could continue using it until they completed, got it up to grade so they could finish it off. And so we thought about it and said, well, yeah, it makes sense if we can get some of it closed now, that means less later. And so, yeah, that 780,000 is for them to finish off the capping of it.
So there won't be any more money coming for any purpose in Rollins there?
Well, if they request, Mr. Chairman, if they come back into the program and request that funding for and it was my understanding there was only a small like 10 acres that they still needed to finish their disposal to get the facility up to grades, and then cap it. But I can check into that and get back to it, Representative Burkhart, if you would like.
All right. Good. Any other questions? Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, with that, I would just say that the 19 projects are reflected in the draft bill, and I would stand for any other questions.
I think that's all we have on that, Luke. Oh, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just Luke, a question for clarification. The carcass management program or project, the $100,000, is that total for all communities, or is there a priority list for those communities?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, that's for all communities. So there's not a separate priority list for the communities. I think the COVID hit the communities pretty hard this year. We were having some conversations with some municipalities about taking advantage of that carcass management fund, and things kind of fell through, I think, with the impact to everybody's budget there.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, my staff has been texting me, and they say, with regard to Representative McGuire's question about the wind turbines. So the total C&D, the construction and demolition area of the Casper landfill, is about 2.6 million cubic yards. The turbine project is supposed to take up about 448,000 cubic yards. So they received 1,100 blades and anticipate about 250 more. So the blades will take up approximately 6% of the C&D area. Thank you, Suzanne.
But a point there, the C&D area is not the line pit that we pay for. It's the sand that they presently own themselves.
Mr. Chairman, it's the C&D construction and demolition. It is a designated area that construction and demolition waste can be permitted in. It is the soils up in Casper are quite sandy, but it's a designated area that we are not requiring liners for certain types of materials that do not show a likelihood of leaching or contaminating groundwater.
One of the things they're trying to do, according to Cindy, is to not bury them too deep, because they think that somebody's going to come up with a recycle for that fiberglass, and they'll be able to resell it for recycle. Any other questions? Yes, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you think it would be recommended to hold your breath between now and when somebody comes up with a economically feasible way to unbury those blades and recycle them and make money at it?
But I think it's a real possibility. We had a local contractor here that almost had it put together to do exactly that. The reclaiming of the blades from the landfill was the least of his costs. So yeah, I think it's going to happen. I don't know who's going to do it. Hopefully we do it in the United States, not some other country. But don't hold your breath, Joe.
Well, Mr. Chairman, since we're on that subject, is that I think that is maybe a question when the Business Council comes before us, is what can we do? What should we be doing? Why haul these to the University of Tennessee for a pilot project on recycling? Why aren't we taking the lead here in Wyoming on it? I think that's, those are legitimate and they drive and push forward. So there's my commentary, Mr. Chairman.
Good commentary. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As well as, I believe it was this committee that we heard, I don't know if it was last year, but we heard some testimony that in Europe, they're already recycling these. There's companies already making fences and different things, products with these blades. So why aren't we doing it here?
I think one of the reasons we have not run out of raw materials yet. Some countries have, and so they're more willing to recycle than we are. So I think it's a good asset to have. Other questions? Other questions? Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And just to weigh in on that discussion, I do think it'll be a few years before there's an economically viable process. I don't know what a few years means, whether that's 3 or 10. but at some point it will be an asset. And as long as we don't irreversibly bury those blades, we locate them at the same place, we're able to access them, then I do think it ends up being an asset where somebody can develop a business model around it. But as you point out, it's just not economically viable right now, because recreating the raw materials is less expensive than recycling the turbine blade. And when you have composite materials like you have with a turbine blade, so whether that's fiberglass or whether that's a carbon fiber or a combination of the two, anytime you have a composite, recycling that composite in any manner where you're kind of reclaiming the initial constituents as opposed to just chipping it and using it for fill is a hell of a chemical challenge. It's very energy intensive, very costly. So the chip and fill idea, that I think that's what some people are already doing. If you need some bulk filling that's relatively inert, you can get that, but that's seems like a waste of the materials. So it'll be a while, but from perspective of a chemical engineer, it's I think it's an asset more than a liability if you have a long-term vision.
This committee and some of us pushed hard on the idea to use it as landfill for the mines. And that was one of the issues that came out of that, was if we do put it in the mines, it's permanent. We don't get to go back and get that out of there. It becomes part of that permanent landfill that the DEQ and the EPA and everybody okays once they cap it. So if we put it in our own little landfills, we can reclaim it, but we probably can't if we put it in mine reclamation. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. On that point, I guess I'd ask Luke or Director Parfit. It seems to me it would still be accessible. You don't have to get a new permit for it. If we were using it as fill, and then you decided that there was value to it, I can't imagine that's fully irreversible, although it might take some permitting work. Director Parfit or Luke, have we thought through on how that might be the case if 25 or 30 years from now somebody wanted to look at those as an asset and use them for a recycling project? If we had a tremendous amount of mass that we used for backfill, enclosure of or remediation of a coal mine?
So, Mr. Chairman, to that question, I don't think it's inaccessible in the future. I don't know that we have a permitting, because you would be mining basically for turbines, but that's not one of the minerals that we regulate. So,
two things on that, Senator Rothfuss. If we're going to dump it in the mines, it's going to be buried way deeper than it would be in our landfill. So reclaiming it would be a high cost of retrieval. And I still think that you'd have to go through quite a jumping jacks to get the agencies to let you dig up their reclaimed and seeded and reclaimed land. So I think it wouldn't be as good as putting it in our surface landfills.
Mr. Chairman, if I could comment on that.
Sure.
And this is going from memory about the land quality rules, but the solid waste division, we coordinated with the land quality division to discuss what would the requirements be for something like that. And it has to maintain a certain distance above a water table. So it may not be as deep as the bottom of the mine itself. It could be somewhat up higher on this ledge.
Even up higher on the ledge is still pretty deep.
Yes, true. And also, just to Senator Rothfuss' earlier question about the status of the rules. So they went to the Land Quality Advisory Board in early October. And so now the next step will be presenting them to the EQC at a future meeting, probably early next year sometime.
Hey, anything else for Luke Ash, mini hats, Luke Ash?
Mr. Chairman, if I could make one more comment to
Sure.
one of Representative Burkhart's earlier questions about Rollins. So I found out that we're actually working with the city of Rollins to see if that remaining portion can remain open under a C&D, used as C&D. So they may not need that additional 780. So we're just going to see if we can work with them right now.
Okay. All right, Luke, if that's a wrap for you, we'll move right along to Kevin Frederick.
Mr. Chairman, we covered that. That was the coal bed methane reservoirs. So we just kind of took it out of order.
Oh, way to go. Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of wraps your presentation, Director Parfit?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. If there's no further questions and comments, we'll move to public comments. Hearing no other comments, questions.
Mr.
Mary
Chairman?
Beth. Yes.
I have just submitted Mark Larson with Wyoming Petroleum Marketers Association and Dan Heelick with Wyoming Outdoor Council.
All right, Mr. Larson, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to address the annual report comments that Mr. Etz covered, and you all kind of sailed through that, and that's a good thing because that means that the program is running well. I wanted to address some of the highlights on that relative to and give you some good positive news. Relative to COVID, the department did an excellent job in making sure that our industry had access to compliance supervisors and others if we did have a release. And as you all know, if you have a release, COVID doesn't wait for that. And we ended up having to do some repairs. DEQ was Johnny on the spot, and they took care of us in prompt fashion. And there's really no glitch at all in the COVID response, and we appreciate that. One thing in the report I wanted to point out, and I will never miss an opportunity to blow the horn of DEQ, STP, and of course, my petroleum marketers, is that Wyoming was constantly 1 or 2 in the compliance area in the EPA reports. And so I think they got tired of us being there, so they changed the report. And so now when we look at the new compliance guidelines, we continue to be at the top at the 87th percentile when the rest of the country is around 45.6%. I think this is just real quickly a testimony to the DEQ's management style in working with the regulated community, not at the regulated community. And I want to point out particularly the compliance sections efforts at making sure that their goal is to educate the industry first before they move into penalties. And they've done an excellent job in that regard, and we appreciate that. We also appreciate that the agency has always asked us to be right up front on rulemaking. They have asked us to help in analyzing, test, and evaluation of the DEQ operator training program. And they also have done some to Representative Henderson's questions about streamlining. They've allowed us to streamline some of the natural reports and allow us to use electronic technology to be able to maintain records for inspections instead of having to maintain all of that at one location if we have the technological capability. My final thing, Mr. Chairman, is to let the committee know that while our numbers are looking very good and DEQ has managed the process well in getting our remediation scheduled in another way, and we're happy to share the remaining proceeds of the landfill remediation and the Orphan tank programs, we're not going away. As Mr. Etch mentioned, the program has been around since 1991. well, that's 30 years ago, and we're starting to see a lot of our tank warranties expire now in that 30-year period. And also wanted to point out that the new EPA requirements for testing that we're doing every 3 years of the spill buckets, the under dispenser pan containment, when we're doing that testing, we're also recognizing that there are some long-term releases that are being exposed because we never checked that area before. So my point today is to just say, hey, you've got a great petroleum storage program in Wyoming, and they've been very effective and efficient and allowing some of the proceeds now to spill over to landfill remediation, as I believe the EPA intended some time ago. But it's always nice to be able to get up and sing the praise of an agency and that is exacting the efficiencies and working with the industry. With that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Mark Larson? Any questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Thank you for your input. Mary Beth, you had one other person on there.
Mr. Chairman, he just notified me that he has no comments to make.
Oh, well, okay. That's wonderful. Nobody else commenting. I see on the agenda we had the introduction of the bill draft was going to be done by staff. Do you want to go ahead and tell us about this bill draft?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think the committee's familiar with this. We do it every year. I just suggest we move the bill and go forward. But that's up to you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think there's some new people on this committee right now, in fact, that might like to hear about it. I think it could be introduced pretty quickly.
Okay.
I agree with you. We sure hear it a lot, but I think there's Kevin maybe hasn't heard it too much. Brian, you want to go ahead and tell us about what you did here?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I can do that quickly. 21 LSO 226, it's draft point 3. This is the cease and transfer priority list for 2021. For those returning members, it looks quite similar to previous years. Starting in page 2, line 4, are standard definitions that are included in each year's bill draft regarding the maximum amount for funding, closure project, transfer project, and solid waste disposal district. Page 2, line 18, just notes the sources of appropriations for funds in the cease and transfer account. That I believe Mr. Esch mentioned the balance of that in his comments. Page 3, line 8 is the list itself, and this list reflects the cease and transfer report, table 1, as well as the changes that are highlighted in table 2 of that report. Moving on to page 4, line 13, this subsection C concerns the carcass management project. So that would be line item 1 in the priority list, and just states that any municipal solid waste facility operator can apply for those funds for infrastructure for hauling or composting dead animals. Page 4, line 22, just gives authority to the Department of Environmental Quality to modify the list and the order of projects to optimize efficiency based on project readiness and to comply with any grant and loan requirements and to address any emergencies. Page 5, line 14, are reporting requirements for DEQ. First, any modifications of the priority list must be reported to this committee and joint appropriations by October 15th. And then the names of recipients and amounts expended for the carcass management project must be reported to this committee as well. The repeal of the session log from 2020 is just repealing the 2020 list, and then this would become effective immediately.
Any questions of our attorney, Mr. Fuller? No. Now, co-chair, Representative Duncan, you did have a question.
No, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to move the bill.
Oh, well then, Representative Greer, would you like to second it? No?
Representative Henderson wants to second it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yep, Representative Henderson is going to second it. Yeah, good idea. Good idea. We'll just leave Greer completely out of it. All right, any other discussion on the bill? Any other discussion on the bill?
Question?
Any other discussion on the bill? Questions have been called. I think this requires a roll call. Mary Beth, could you do a roll call for us on this?
Sure thing, Mr. Chairman. This is a roll call vote on 21 LSO 226 version 3 with no amendments. Senator Beitman.
Excused.
Senator Coe.
Excused.
Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Senator Wasberger.
Aye.
Representative Burkhart.
Aye.
Representative Crank.
Aye.
Representative Duncan. Representative Duncan, I didn't hear you.
You're mute.
Aye.
Representative Ayer.
Aye.
Representative Furphy.
Aye.
Representative Henderson.
Aye.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Greer.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Anderson.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that passes.
Okay, good. We'll work on who's going to take the thing. I think it probably has to go to the House with the money that's in it, so probably has to go there first. But we'll assign that. Okay, that takes care of the business on Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you, Todd, and your team for pulling us through that and moving us quickly. We are ahead of schedule. Maybe we could take just a 10-minute break before we get Holly started on hers to a bio break. So let's start back into this at 11:15, please. Well, it's 11:15 and I think we have a quorum, so I believe we'll go ahead and get started. Next up on the agenda is Dr. Holly Krutka with the School of Energy Resources and her update. You want to go ahead?
Thank you, Mr.
Holly?
Chairman. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's okay. I'll just share my screen here, share my presentation. Let's see. Okay, are you seeing the full screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. Let me just, okay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Really appreciate you having me on to speak with you today. So today I just wanted to give an update. My goal is to update this committee on a couple of key areas of progress here at the School of Energy Resources. Before I begin, I, as always, just want to thank the Wyoming Legislature for your support. It's been difficult to take the helm at SER in this year of COVID. So I've met far fewer of you than I would have liked at this point, but I would welcome you to reach out to me anytime and know that we understand where our support comes from. We understand our mission, and I'm always here for questions or comments for this group or energy stakeholders more broadly. So today what I'll talk about is, I'll as always hit on our mission. I just have one slide on our academic program that I would like to give an update, and then do a little bit of a deep dive in our carbon engineering program, and then talk about future direction and growth areas. So that brings us to our mission, which is energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming. So, like I said, I'll spend most of my time today on our research program, but I did want to say a couple things about our academic program as well. So our academic program here at the School of Energy Resources has one major, which is Energy Resource Management and Development. It has two concentrations. One is Professional Land Management, and the other is Energy, Land, and Water Management. And while our program is small, we're really proud of the outcomes for our graduates. Many go on to law school and find fulfilling careers in the energy sector. We have 92% job or graduate school placement since the inception of our program in 2009. We are currently undertaking a strategic review of our academic program. And over time, I'd like to explore and undertake opportunities to increase SER's academic program beyond just the students that choose to take our major. So we're exploring what we can do to offer minors or electives so that we can impact more students across the university and help them develop an understanding of the Wyoming energy sector, as well as an appreciation of the value it provides. So more to come on that in the future. So moving on to our research program. So this is just a high-level summary of the different areas the School of Energy Resources and our faculty members are working on. So our goal is to drive incremental Wyoming energy production and revenue through applied technology and policy research focused on commercialization. We don't do research for the sake of research. We're always focused on what can we get out and commercialize so that it's benefiting the state. So a few different areas that we work on are probably our largest area of focus is CO2 capture, use, and storage. And that's a suite of technologies and policies that benefits all Wyoming fossil fuels, so both really, especially coal and natural gas. In that area, we're working on things like novel catalysts to make post-combustion CO2 capture. So that's the kind of technologies that you retrofit onto an existing power plant, things that you would test at the integrated test center. We have a novel catalyst that we're aiming to develop and deploy to make those technologies less expensive. We also are working on the flameless pressurized oxy-combustion system, which is a novel type of power plant that has integrated CO2 capture. So you don't have to retrofit anything to the power plant to have CO2 capture. And this is a brand new type of power plant. And we're trying to scale that up advance that technology as well. So we do have a wide spectrum. We do a lot on the CO2 storage side and policy as well. We also, largely through our faculty, are working on incremental oil and gas production. So one of our faculty members is working on a research project that explores the compatibility of fracking fluids, focused exclusively on Wyoming reservoirs. So looking at how these fracking fluids work in Wyoming. We also have another faculty member developing a Bayesian modeling program. And what that means is just machine learning, so that to improve geologic understanding and hopefully improve outcomes for industry in the state. And then of course, our most well-known program is the Center of Innovation for Flow-Through Porous Media, led by Dr. Mohammed Piri. We also work really closely with the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. There's a lot of space for collaboration with that group, and structurally they report up through the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. Looking at the area of incremental coal production in the state, we are working on processes to create novel products from coal, so things outside of burning coal for the electricity sector, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. We're also working on coal beneficiation, so the concept of drying PRB coal so that it can compete better with Eastern coals, and not just drying, but stabilizing, so you don't have the problems of spontaneous combustion. So those are areas where we're trying to drive incremental production of Wyoming coal. And then we're also working on new and emerging Wyoming industries, such as rare earth elements, both the production, characterization of those, as well as refining to get to the higher value add products, and critical mineral production. So this slide demonstrates how we execute our research program. So our research program is separated into centers of excellence, and the three on the left are led by SER staff who only work on this research program as their full-time job. Those on the right column are led by faculty at the University of Wyoming. So not shown on this slide is the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, which I said is part of the School of Energy Resources from the perspective of the University of Wyoming, and who we work with regularly and have a lot of space for collaboration. So on this slide, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So for our Center of Economic Geology Research, that's the group that leads our CO2 storage program. And they do have the Carbon Safe, the Wyoming Carbon Safe project. They lead that, although there's a lot of collaborators. And that's the project focused on developing a CO2 storage site adjacent to Basin Electric's Dry Fork Power Plant. And it is a commercial scale storage site that they are working to develop that could hold up to 50 million tons of CO2. This is also the group that collaborates with faculty on incremental oil and gas production, rare earth elements, and critical minerals. And all the projects in bold are principally funded from non-state resources, but I would say that state funding is really critical to seed these programs, and sometimes for cost share. Moving over to the next column, the Center of Carbon Capture and Conversion. This used to be called Carbon Engineering or Emerging Technology. We just gave it a new name, but this is the group focused on the flameless pressurized oxycombustion. So that's a new type of power plant that has integrated CO2 capture, catalysts for CO2 capture as well, and for post-combustion CO2 capture that I already talked about. This is the group working on novel uses for Wyoming coal and the PRB coal beneficiation. We also have a relatively new policy center, the Center for Energy Regulation Policy Analysis. This group is largely focused on doing research on various policies such as House Bill 200 and trying to understand how that would be implemented. They also look at other states, given that Wyoming is such a large energy exporter, we can't afford to not have our voice heard outside the state. So they're always looking at energy policies for other states and how they can impact Wyoming. And this group also does real-time support of Wyoming elected and appointed officials. And then on the right-hand side, we have faculty-led centers of excellence. So I already mentioned the Center of Innovation for Flow-Through Porous Media. We also have a Center for Air Quality, which supports Wyoming industries and helps to develop lower costs and novel approaches to do things like measure upstream methane emissions. We also have a Center for Produced Water Management, a Center for Biogenic Natural Gas Research, and a Center for Wind Energy Research. That it did exist. The research center. It existed, and it ceased to exist, and now we're standing that back up again. So I wanted to show this graph because it's a good way to demonstrate how SCR spends the dollars appropriated by the state. We use these appropriations to drive Wyoming-focused energy research across campus. And so through this approach, we're able to harness the value of interdisciplinary collaboration in our research. And most importantly, I want you to know that when SCR is appropriated funds, it doesn't all stay here with SCR. We try to distribute it across campus to use all these great minds over here and try to put our thumb on the scale to get them focused on Wyoming projects. So I don't have anything about the budget cuts included in my presentation today, although I'd be happy to discuss that. But I will say, when SCR's budget gets cut, it impacts not just SCR, but all these departments that are funded by SCR. So you can see quite large tranches for the College of Engineering and the College of Arts and Sciences, particularly the Department of Geology and Geophysics. So now I just want to spend a few minutes doing a deep dive in one area in particular, which is our carbon engineering. Yeah,
Mr.
sorry,
Chairman?
I can't see you.
No, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I can't hear you. I'm gonna.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Holly, before you move on, but so again, I said throughout the day I'd pick on Senator Coe. But as we lose our more experienced legislators, we start to kind of lose the perspective of the school, or why we have the School of Energy Resources. And so this slide that Holly has up is a good indicator. It was established for a couple of reasons. And one was to have a conduit for the legislature to have and drive energy development and research that was for something more than the sake of research, to actually impact industry, to assist industry, to take things to the next level. And how they leverage these funds out through the other colleges at the University of Wyoming are specifically targeted for that purpose. And I just, and then Holly, I don't know if you want to comment any further on that, but that we're losing a little bit of that institutional knowledge as we progress through our legislative classes here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yep. So I will comment, yeah, and I guess I don't have it as part of my presentation, but one of the ways that that we are able to take the input from the Wyoming legislature on our research program and our other programs is through our governance structure, which includes the Energy Resources Council, which has, of course, the Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, really grateful for you serving on that. And so, but that, I think that you summarized it quite well. I mean, that's our goal, is this applied research for the benefit of the state. And that's why we're very in focused and always welcoming input from the legislature and the energy industry in the state. But yeah, so we are different in that in our mission, and we do have we have some flexibility built in so that we can tackle problems that the state's facing. So if that's okay, I'll keep going now. Okay. So on that, obviously one of a major challenge facing state revenue is the decline in coal consumption for the electric sector. So one of the things we are doing to try to address that is developing, and we have an existing and try to grow a research program, what we call carbon engineering. You can think of it as coal to non-energy products. And this is the area where we have the largest state appropriations funding this research portfolio. So we have applied for a Maine patent and several subsequent patents to protect this process. This is our thermochemical PRB coal conversion technology platform, and it relies on pyrolysis and solvent extraction. And don't want to get into the technical details, but what that means is just know that the School of Energy Resources and our coal to products program is focused on high volume, so processes or products that are going to use a lot of coal. Is what we mean by high volume. Porous carbon products like soil amendments, building materials, and asphalt replacements. One thing we're planning to do in the near future, for example, is build a mini house made derived from coal. So we're trying to do things that are large in scale. This process is specifically designed, however, to have much lower capital costs and operating costs compared to the conventional processes that have been developed to make products from coal over the years. So, and just so you know, the School of Energy Resources is always focused on high volume products and using as much coal as we can. We will never be able to replace the amount of coal that's being used in the electric sector, but we are aiming to use as much as we possibly can in this process. Because that's what's going to provide the most value and return on investment to the state. So this slide is just outlining our program goals and approach in this coal to products or carbon engineering program. So we do leverage talent on campus and try to focus it and use these dollars to try to get faculty on campus focus on research that will make new products from coal. So we're very heavily collaborating with the College of Engineering and Applied Science in this space. We have a lot of faculty members who are contributing to our program and a lot of grad students. And we also, for example, for our soil amendment that we're working on, we're working with the College of Ag and Natural Resources. I think I already said we're focused on high volume applications, but we also do high value research. So maybe products that don't use as much coal, but could have a lot of value for the products, things like graphene oxides, resins and coatings, and carbon fiber mats that could be used for energy storage. And the reason we're working on those too is we're looking at the perspective that if we make soil amendments, building materials, and asphalt additives, those are big products, but there's some byproducts from the process. We need to figure out how to use those. And if we can use them in a way that drives a lot of value, then we can make the overall process more economic and more attractive commercially. So we are also focused on doing this in a way that does not increase the environmental footprint compared to conventional products. So we're always looking at lower carbon products. And we have, for example, a dry methane reforming catalyst so that we can use any CO2 coming off this process. And we collaborate with commercial partners throughout the process so that we understand what traits and characteristics are needed. Our goal is to demonstrate some products in the field, like a housemate that's derived from coal byproducts by 2021, and then have a field demonstration of the whole process by 2023. So this slide just outlines our target dates for this carbon engineering project. So this tranche of funding was appropriated in a $7 million exception fund. Plus we use a little bit of our standard budget to support that. So that funding must be approved by the Energy Resources Council before we're allowed to use it. So we have to explain what we're going to do with that funding and the products that are going to be targeted. So everything through June 2021 we presented a plan to the Energy Resources Council, and that's been approved. We would need to go back for further approval of our appropriated funds before we proceed beyond June 2021. I will say COVID is definitely delaying our schedule. As of now, we are still on target to begin building a pilot plant in the field, not in the lab, but in the field in the late 2021, early 2022 timeframe. I'll keep you updated on that. COVID's delaying us, but this is our current schedule. So it just depends how long the impacts are. And our target goal is to have the pilot operating in the field by 2023. So moving on to, yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Holly, the field pilot target dates. Couple questions. One, what kind of money are we talking to get to May 2023 for a pilot plant? And on the pilot plant, how much throughput is it anticipated to develop?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Chair.
Representative Burkhart. Thank you. Representative Burkhart, Mr. Chairman, thanks for your question. The pilot, we believe we already have the funds appropriated, but we don't have the costs in. We are right now undertaking the final cost estimates from the preliminary engineering that's been completed. So right now we have approved, we have that $7 million exception fund that we believe will cover the pilot. As far as the throughput, we're looking at up to 50 tons per day. I will confirm that, but yeah, 50 tons per day. So it is, we're way beyond lab scale. Right now, I would say we have a continuous pilot that we're in the lab that we're trying to stand up. I would call that bench scale. And I do think that this is truly a pilot, but to get from the scale of what we're calling this pilot in the field, the 2023 pilot, to commercial, you still have 2 orders of magnitude scale up. So that's still pretty large scale up to achieve before you would have commercial scale.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Holly.
Okay, so, okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a little bit more on forward-looking, what you can expect to see from the School of Energy Resources in the future. And one thing I want to comment on before I go through this slide is, that's not on here, but we've been honored to support the Wyoming Energy Authority and engage with that group earlier in their existence. I know they're speaking later today. They've included us in several stakeholder discussions that are focused on bringing new industries and new companies and technologies to Wyoming. And that kind of collaboration always is helping us to spark new ideas. I'd like to offer one example of how we're supporting the Wyoming Energy Authority and how they're supporting us. So as a university entity, even though we're very commercial focused, it would be, and despite the fact we have a policy center, it would be unusual and for the School of Energy Resources to comment publicly on other states' energy policies. So if another state had, a request for information on an energy policy they're considering, it's typically not a university role to get involved in that. But SER can do the research and we can prepare comments, but the Wyoming Energy Authority enables us to be able to submit that comment. So we work with them to submit comments. I think we're actually doing some comments to California today. And those are focused on why Wyoming fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage should be included in any low carbon fuel standards or electricity standards or anything that they're considering. They should include Wyoming fuels with CO2 storage. And because Wyoming is such an energy exporter, it's really important to make our voice heard in those conversations. So we're really grateful for WEA helping us to have a venue to get those comments out. I think there's, so moving on to this slide, there's several growth opportunities for SER that in areas which we're not working yet. So one area we are working, but we're starting to scale up is rare earth elements and critical minerals. And we are working on that. So far, our work is focused on rare earths and critical minerals associated with coal seams. And we do have federally funded research projects in that area. I think another growth area that we need to look at is hydrogen. Both the production from fossil fuels, storage of hydrogen, subsurface storage and use. I think we have a lot of the pieces here at the School of Energy Resources and around campus and beyond campus and throughout the state to work on hydrogen as a fuel source. And I think it's something that if we launch soon, we can be ahead of the curve. And I will say, I do think, obviously we're facing budget cuts. How can we launch something new? But this is what SER is supposed to do, is use seed funding from the state and try to bring in other sources of funding. And I think there's not just federal funds available for hydrogen research, but there's also industry funds. So EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, is building a consortia where they've had industry partners put money into a pool where they're going to fund a lot of hydrogen research. And I think that is up to 75 million-ish now, and it's expected to grow. So there are opportunities, and I think we need to get in the ground on that. I think there's a lot of positives about Wyoming that can make this an interesting new sector for the state. And moving on, value-added manufacturing is something we're already doing. We're already doing it for coal, like the carbon engineering program I talked about, where we're trying to create new products and not just dig up the minerals, but actually find ways to use them in novel ways. And I think this is something we can do more broadly, again, for rare earths and critical minerals. And we are putting together some proposals right now in that regard. So watch for these areas to grow in the School of Energy Resources, and for us to try to leverage the appropriations we have from the state as much as we can. I think there might be a question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Henderson.
Actually, Representative McGuire had his hand up twice, so I'll wait till he asks his question.
Okay, Representative Henderson, go ahead.
I'll wait for Rep. McGuire as well.
Representative McGuire, go ahead. You're a popular one.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of my questions, and I continue to ask this, and I understand the need for patents and to protect intellectual property, but are we presenting this to whether it be industry partners or other academic partners in something of an open source, so that we are encouraging people to partake in this technology? And because ultimately what we want is we want to keep coal-fired power plants open around the country. And my fear is that they look at this new technology, it's patented, it's protected, and that they would be reluctant to come and take that technology and take it to their current coal-fired power plants and keep burning Wyoming coal. Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative McGuire. I think that's a really good point. So our patent protection is largely around the things that are novel and new. Sorry, let me just get some water. For example, I mean, we definitely develop things that we are willing to share openly to help the states. For example, let's focus on coal, so state's coal industry. So let me just give you an example. Like, for example, the School of Energy Resources is developing model agreements for CO2 storage, and we're not, that's not something that's patentable, but it's also not something that we're trying to keep close to our chest. That's something that we intend to be able to hand to industry to make their process easier if they want to do CO2 storage in the state. As far as our patents for like the carbon engineering program, we go after that intellectual property protection largely to make it more attractive to commercial entities, so that they know that if they invest and build a commercial process, and we're not going to build a commercial process at the School of Energy Resources. That's not what we do. So we need to make it attractive, that they know if they invest in that process, that it will be protected legally and that they can make a profit off of it. And that's how we're going to get more coal use. So the idea is to protect the intellectual property, but then get it out so it can be used. But so I totally agree with you. And I want you to know that we're in line 100%. We feel like we have to protect the intellectual property, but our goal is always to drive revenue through incremental energy production, and we're not going to hold anything close.
Representative McGuire, another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a quick follow-up. And so how does the chain of command or chain of decision making work, so to speak? So let's say that an industry partner wants to come in and make an investment based on patented material, there are going to be royalties, there are going to be payments there. So who ultimately, is it the president of the university? Is it the head of the athletic department? I mean, who actually is involved in these negotiations and make sure that the interests of the state are protected? Because there are interests on the people who have developed the patent. And I understand that they are not necessarily going to be the same as the interests of other people. So how does that work? If you could enlighten me, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Holly, go ahead.
Okay. So Representative McGuire, that's a really good question as well. So I think we have to work. So SCR is a part of the University of Wyoming. And so we have developed processes here on campus to license technologies developed here at the university, regardless of the source of funding, to commercial entities. You know, I haven't participated in that process since I've been here yet. So I'd be happy to look into it in more detail, but it is the University of Wyoming, the Office of General Counsel, that leads that licensing. For SCR, for the School of Energy Resources, you know, again, we're fortunate to have Wyoming legislators and Wyoming focused folks on our Energy Resources Council. And so we would have the opportunity to get input from that group. We meet quarterly, so we do have the ability to get input through that through our governance structure, which is a little bit unique here at the university. But I hope I answered your question. If I didn't, I'd be happy to follow up offline.
Chairman?
Yes, Co-Chairman Greer.
Yeah, Representative McGuire, I can say what Holly can't. The process needs work. And it depends upon the circumstances and the uniqueness of what technology is being developed or what idea, and then also of the nature of private industry's investment with it. But it is a process that I personally believe needs some attention.
Representative Henderson, did you have a question earlier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple quick ones. Doctor, you mentioned earlier a high percentage of job placements. I was wondering how many, what portion of those are job placements in Wyoming, and of that, how many related to that? How many Wyoming residents are in the programs at SCR? Thank you.
Go ahead, Holly.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, that's a great question. I don't have the percentages for you off the top of my head. I can try to find out percentages, but what I will say is I'm lucky we've been undertaking a strategic review. And so part of that has been interviewing alumni from our program. And we have quite a few that are still living in Wyoming. And the reason for that is because one of our two concentrations, that landman program, is focused on land considerations, and Wyoming is a great place to be a landman. And so we did talk to some alumni. We had one in Houston, we had a couple in Denver, but we also have several throughout the state. So I don't have percentages, but I will say I believe that our academic program does enable students to stay in and around Wyoming in the energy sector if they so choose. That is one of our program goals, is because we're trying to develop expertise that is important for the state. And I'll also say our energy, or our program is heavily focused on land and Western issues. So, but land is land. So whether they're working on oil and gas or coal or reclamation or wind or solar or uranium production or trona, there's a lot of opportunities in the area and in the region for our students, because the issues are the same. So we're not too focused.
Quick follow-up.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'm looking for is, is wanting to know ways that we can help our workforce be more competitive. And so as these programs are being put together, like for example, in the wind energy, and it was recycling was mentioned earlier, are there other opportunities involved in that process development that will also engage and make our workforce more competitive? And that's my main point or question. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So Representative Henderson, I do think a lot of the research and the processes we're working on they're all Wyoming focused. And so it could, so I'm not now talking about our academic program, but the students that are helping us, they're working on those technologies and are helping us develop those. They're going to be the world experts in those technologies when they're developed. For example, I would say that if you look at the area of CO2 storage, we are developing geologists in the University of Wyoming, and even the School of Energy Resources. We're small, but we are a recruiter of University of Wyoming geology students. So we are, both through our research program and our academic program, I think we are developing kind of value added industries that are going to help our workforce be more competitive. I hope that answers your question. If I don't, I'd be happy to follow up as well.
That's a great answer. I'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Krutka, you talked a little bit about interest in moving forward with hydrogen and exploring hydrogen and what we can do with it. One of the things that you and I talked about in an earlier conversation was utilizing hydrogen as possibly a transitory energy storage so that we can facilitate renewables, for example, or utilizing our capacity for energy storage through hydrogen on the grid. And I don't think that really came through in the presentation, but I think it's a really neat idea. So if you wanted to talk just a little bit about that, I know we're not too far down that road, but I think it's interesting for this committee to discuss.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, I agree. Personally, to me, Senator Rothfuss, I think what you're talking about has so much value, particularly if new wind is being built on the state. You know, the idea that you can use hydrogen and potentially store it in bulk in the subsurface, which is an area where I think we have a lot of expertise. We could do arbitrage, right? So if other states are building a lot of wind and solar and they're not having large scale storage, potentially we would have the opportunity in Wyoming to use the transmission to those areas and hydrogen to use how should I say? So use wind to create hydrogen and then use that hydrogen when the costs or the price of electricity is the highest and hopefully get the most value for Wyoming. That's the idea. I mean, there's a lot of different areas in hydrogen. And by the way, you know, it doesn't just have to be made from wind. It can also be made from fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage. So I just feel like there's so much here we can do in the state, but what you're talking about is exactly where we think that the focus needs to be, which is not just making it and using it, but using it strategically to bring the most revenue and value to the Wyoming energy sector, no matter where the hydrogen comes from.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Krutka, one of the other things that you raised was kind of the new Energy Policy Center and looking at future of energy policy. This is something that I think this committee is particularly going to benefit from as we start to figure out what the energy future for Wyoming is going to look like. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what projects you're pursuing there and what the future looks like for that new institute, things that we'll look forward to on this committee.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Senator Rothfuss, great question. So, you know, that's a dynamic center. We're always interested in new topics that we can explore. One undertaking right now that center is working on is looking at the impact of a fracking ban on Wyoming and other energy producing states. Another area that they're looking at, or they're getting ready to launch, is an analysis of House Bill 200, how that could be implemented, and any support we can provide on the research side to the Public Service Commission. Another area we're looking at is trying to develop a comprehensive picture of other states' energy policies, because as an exporter, we need to understand if there's, policies in surrounding states or not surrounding states, like Texas obviously is a huge user of Wyoming coal. Where is their energy policy going, and what would it mean to us? So if they have some sort of clean energy standard or something that's going to impact their coal consumption from Wyoming, we need to have that information as a state. And so that's the type of thing. Okay, one more. And this is also the center working on developing those model contracts for CO2 storage, so that if someone wanted to do CO2 storage in the state, it would be easier for them. So it's pretty broad array. And the way we're able to accomplish that, again, like using a lot of resources on campus, a lot of faculty that are already working in this space, but bringing them all together.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Krutka. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Krutka. This is a different question, and that is, as a person who's new to the university and taking a look at it with a fresh look. Last week, the administration released its recommendation for budget reductions, which included about 78 positions, 50 across the different academic colleges, and 28 support positions, and it went on. And then within there was a short line that said on athletics, reduced team travel costs. And I'm just curious, because this next session, we're going to be involved with a lot of cuts. And the question is always fairness and doing it the right way. Right now on campus, is the feeling that the proposed cuts are fair and in the most responsible manner for the people of the state of Wyoming? Thank you.
Holly, you want to address that?
Mr. Chairman, sure. So I will say it's a little challenging for me. I don't know that I have the best read on the pulse of what everyone on campus is thinking about fairness. I'll just say, from my perspective, it's really challenging to be strategic. So one of the things that President Seidel even said in his joint appropriations comments when he was getting questions was, it's really, you don't have very many levers to pull. So when you have a budget cut at a university, I think over time you can make things really strategic. But for us at SER, I don't have a lot of levers to pull. There's a lot of rules about tenure and how you can, how you can make cuts. And so I think it's a big challenge when the university has to make budget cuts. It's certainly been a challenge for SER to try to do that strategically. I guess I'll just say I think that we can get there over time. I know that's a non-answer, but I am pretty new and probably don't have my pulse on exactly whether or not most people think the cuts are fair or not.
Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Seeing none, we want to thank you, Holly, for your presentation today. Very well done. We appreciate the job you're doing at the university there and with the SER. Obviously, that's a real pride for the legislature to fund you separately so that we can get energy resources addressed at the University of Wyoming. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but I did have a late public request who would like to comment on this topic. Terrence Manning, he's the CEO of Glenrock Energy, and I will go ahead and admit him now.
Okay, all right. Terrence, are you on there? Still says he's connecting to the audio. Mary Beth.
Mr. Chairman, we might want to give him just a moment.
I guess whether I want to or not, I'm going to. Looks like he's made it, but was he calling in, Mary Beth?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any idea. He does have that ability. He has the ability to also turn on his camera. I don't know which way he is in the meeting.
Mr. Manning's group is trying to use a carbon capture system on the Glen Rock coal facility to use it for enhanced soil recovery in a couple of the fields down there in the Converse County area. So I think that's probably what he's going to talk about, but I don't know. Oh, looks like he's connected. Terrence, you want to unmute yourself and go ahead with your presentation? Looks like you got unmuted, but we still can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's better. Yeah.
Well, thank you, committee. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Krutka. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. I got two phones going, and I had you guys on YouTube on one phone and two different audio lines. So I apologize for messing that up.
You're forgiven.
Can you hear me now?
Not near as well.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Manning needs to turn off his YouTube.
Thank you, Dr. Krutka. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. I got two phones going, and I had you guys on YouTube on one phone.
Mr. Manning, can you turn off your YouTube? We're getting feedback from it, I think. No, we still can't hear you. You were doing just fine there for just a little bit, but now you're...
Okay, are we good now?
There you go. There you go.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for the technical help on getting rid of the YouTube session. I apologize for that. Dr. Krutka, do you have a moment for a question?
As long as Mr. Chairman says yes, I do.
Mr. Chairman, I just, I think it's a bad policy or procedure to allow one presenter to ask questions of another presenter. If you've got comments to the committee, that's fine. And the committee could, if they so desired, could ask Holly any questions from there. It's in my opinion, we open a door to a procedure that could be dangerous. I'm not saying it is at this point in time, but.
Mr. Manning, why don't you address your question to the group, not to the specific presenter, and then if we so desire, we'll address it to the party. So go ahead.
Very good. And I acknowledge Representative Greer's comment as true and accurate. I apologize to the committee. Chairman, I have a question with respect to the recent report that was published by Stanford University, specifically targeting various carbon capture technologies as it relates to California's stance on certain matters pertaining to electricity generation and those related issues. My question for Dr. Krutka and directed to the committee is whether or not, given that Wyoming has been targeted by many folks in the nation above my pay grade as a prime location for the installation of carbon capture for the sustaining of coal-fueled baseload electrical generation, whether the University of Wyoming could undertake something in that kind of a study in order to put Wyoming at the forefront of the nation's kind of cusp for implementing those technologies. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you for the question. Okay, I think we can just refer that question to Holly and let her work with that in the future and get back to Mr. Manning on her own, or anybody else that wants to get back to him also. Is there any other public comment, Mary Beth?
Mr. Chairman, did I send that report? I glanced through that. I didn't read that Stanford report regarding California's views on carbon capture. Did I send that to the full committee? Did the committee receive it? Okay, I see Representative McGuire with a thumbs up. Okay, thank you. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anyone else signed up for public comment.
Okay, all right. Holly, if you would address that for Mr. Manning, and we'd appreciate it, but we don't need to do it here. You can do it offline, and it'd be good to talk to him offline anyway. Okay, we have the Power Company of Wyoming. Mary Beth, are they ready to go, or could we put them off till after lunch?
Mr. Chairman, they are ready to rock and roll, but I'm sure that they don't mind taking a lunch break.
So,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Representative Duncan has a 12:30 meeting. We may be helping her schedule out immensely. If it's okay with you and the rest of the committee, is maybe punch through a half an hour here. I don't know.
What was your proposal?
Is that, we had this slated for a half an hour on our agenda. Representative Duncan has a meeting. We all have our day jobs. She has a meeting at 12:30. If maybe we could go for the next half an hour on this subject and accommodate Representative Duncan's schedule. I'm willing to work an extra half hour into the lunch hour.
Representative Duncan, how long is your meeting, your 12:30 meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's actually an hour, so I'm hoping to cut it shorter, but it's scheduled for an hour.
And that's 12:30 to 1:30?
Yes, sir. I'm hoping to cut it shorter, but I don't have control.
So if we reconvened at 1, we might not miss you very much anyway, huh?
No, sir.
Okay, the chair's going to go ahead and put Power Company of Wyoming off till 1 o'clock, and we're going to do a lunch hour from 12 to 1, reconvene promptly at 1, and hopefully Representative Duncan will be back by that time. So Kara, if you could, we can put you off till 1 right after our lunch break.
That works for me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.